We arrived at our local pub. I followed him inside, feeling small and defeated. Despite our strict training before my upcoming fight, Darren bought us a couple of drinks and set them down firmly in front of me. "All right, explain," he demanded, his voice showing his frustration. I could see the anger on his face. He had seen the photos and video on Amy's phone that clearly showed me with Georgia, my ex-wife. The email saying I was having an affair with her didn't help either. "Darren," I sighed, "you should know I would never cheat on Amy. After everything Georgia put me through, all of you should know that." As I took a sip of my drink, my panic about Amy's sadness began to turn into anger as my thoughts started to clear up. "Then what about the email, those pictures, that video?" he asked, still upset but willing to listen as he watched my changing emotions. "Darren," I said, meeting his gaze. I felt a bit embarrassed because he had seen me in a vulnerable situation just moments ago, but I knew I had to be honest. "Have you and Tony never taken some private pictures or videos?" I asked. "After all your years together, are you telling me there aren't any pictures of her that only you should see?" He paused, taken aback by my question. For a moment he seemed to think. "Of course there are," he admitted, a little sheepishly. "But those are private between us, the email and those pictures. Amy just saw them." "Darren," I interrupted, sensing he was falling back into doubt. "I know those pictures. They are almost 10 years old. Think about who I was married to then. At that time, I thought I was happily married to Georgia." I watched his expression change as he processed my words. He cursed under his breath, redirecting his anger away from me. "Son of a gun!" "Yeah," I nodded. "I am in those photos, but they were private moments between Georgia and me. Now I think my family is trying to ruin my marriage to the woman I love very much." We sat in silence for a moment, sipping our drinks and lost in thought. "Robbie, I'm sorry," Darren said, looking concerned. "I didn't want to believe it, but now it makes sense. I can see how Amy and Tony, I can see how they might not understand." I shrugged. "They are two very pregnant women. I don't want to insult them, but sometimes they might not think things through." We talked for a few more minutes, both feeling angry that someone in my family had shared private photos and videos with Amy. Darren sent a message to Tony and Amy. "I've talked to Robbie. He is right. It's not what it seems. Those images are from his past marriage. He is not unfaithful. He loves Amy." We finished our drinks, and I felt terrible knowing that my past was hurting Amy. Darren sighed and put his phone away. "Come on, Robbie. Let's go back to the house and fix this." Just as we were leaving, my phone rang. I was relieved to see it was Amy. I thought she would sound calm after Darren's text, but instead she sounded panicked. "Robbie?" Amy said. She sounded like she was on the edge of breaking down. Thinking she was still upset, I spoke in the calmest voice I could. "I'm here, my love. I'm coming home to explain everything." "Robbie, I'm scared," Amy said, struggling to hold it together. "It's okay. On my way. I'm so sorry you saw," I began, but she interrupted. "Not that, Robbie. I'm bleeding. Please help me," she pleaded. I could hear the fear in her voice. It was about something much more serious. Before she could say anything else, I took off running up the hill, leaving the car behind. Darren quickly followed, knowing something was really wrong. "I'm coming, Amy!" I yelled. I glanced at Darren beside me. People moved aside as we ran past, recognizing we were in a hurry. "Darren!" I shouted. "We need an ambulance at our house now. I'm on the phone with Amy and she's bleeding." He swore under his breath and pulled out his phone to call emergency services. A few minutes later, I burst through the door and rushed to the bathroom. Amy was sitting on the floor, looking scared. I ran to her and wrapped her in my arms, reassuring her that help was on the way. I don't care if you're unfaithful. I love you, Robbie. I need you. Even if you don't love me, she cried, shifting from anger to sadness. Our baby is going to be fine, I told her. Amy, I promise I am not being unfaithful to you. But, she began, and I placed my finger gently on her lips. Those pictures are from years ago, when I was married to your sister. Someone is not telling the whole truth. I would never betray the woman I love, I said, kissing her on the forehead as the lights of an ambulance flashed outside the bathroom window. Amy relaxed a little. A short time later, Darren led the ambulance team to the bathroom. After checking her quickly, Amy was taken to the local hospital, with Darren and Tony following closely with our son, William. Because Amy was pregnant and bleeding, she was treated as a high priority at the hospital, and it wasn't long before she was with the doctor. I stood outside the curtain when Darren and Tony arrived. Darren held a sleepy William. Tony came to me and gave me a gentle hug. Then Darren handed me my son, who snuggled into my arms and sighed. I made sure not to hold him too tightly. Robbie, I am so sorry, Tony said, her voice sincere. We saw the email with those pictures and didn't think to ask more. Darren told me what really happened. I am really sorry. It's okay, Tony. None of us could have guessed this would happen. Right now, I just want to make sure Amy and the baby are okay. I can deal with the rest later. We talked for a bit more until the doctor came and pulled back the privacy curtain. Mr. Other, your wife and baby are doing fine. She had a small bleed caused by stress from what happened tonight. He looked at me for a moment. I have to mention that your wife shared some details to help me understand. I glanced over at Amy, and we both shared a look of embarrassment. Mrs. Other is not in immediate danger, the doctor continued, and the baby is perfectly healthy. However, she will need plenty of rest until delivery to avoid any strain on either of them, which means no heavy activity. The doctor and I talked a little longer. Then he left us, and we gathered around Amy. I took William over to meet his mother and suggested that Darren and Tony take him to the hospital cafe to give us a few moments alone. I settled beside Amy's hospital bed, reaching out to hold her hand. She was connected to two monitors, one showing her heart rate and the other showing the baby's heartbeat. The moment I offered my hand, she held it tightly. They want to keep an eye on us for a few hours, she began, then squeezed my hand as I looked at her belly. Baby, I am so sorry, my wife said sadly. I saw those pictures after reading the email. I didn't think, and just opened the attachments. Then I jumped to conclusions. I mean the email, and then seeing it. And I felt like you could leave me, that you may not love me. I hugged her gently. Amy Grace Other, I love you more than anything. What I had with Georgia is not even close to what we have. My marriage to her is just a faded memory. I'm embarrassed that anyone saw those photos, but they were taken when Georgia and I were together. They are like our private moments. I understand now, Robbie. I'm sorry. I just got upset. She looked at me and asked, Are there more than what was sent to me? Yeah, a few. Though Georgia is not as beautiful as you, we smiled at each other. But there are probably a few dozen more photos and a couple more videos out there. I'm sorry, Amy. I deleted them from my phone not long after we started dating. The last time I looked at them was maybe 3 months before I found Brad and Georgia together. I never thought someone else would have them or use them against us. I feel so embarrassed that Darren, Tony, and you saw my personal photos with someone else. You mean you'd rather they see our personal photos instead? she said jokingly, a smile finally appearing on her face. I laughed. No way. Your body is ours, just as I am yours. She looked at me seriously. Robbie? Yes? Can you take out your phone for me? Sure. Why? This is why. As I opened my phone, she lifted her shirt slightly. Please, take a photo before someone comes in. I smiled as she grinned back at me while I took a few photos. Satisfied, she put her shirt down. Just then, Darren and Tony came back with William. Our son was awake now and wanted to sit with his mom. Darren gave me a knowing look. Did we interrupt something? Kinda, I replied with a smile. They stayed for another 20 minutes, deciding to take William home and agreeing to stay at our place for the night when the doctor returned to check on Amy. I held her hand while he examined her. We all sighed in relief when he said the bleeding had stopped. He explained that he wanted to monitor her overnight. I stayed in the chair beside the bed that night as Amy fell asleep. It was around 3 in the morning when Amy woke up looking upset. I'm so frustrated, I'm going to confront that person, she shouted, startling me awake from my awkward position. Amy? Are you okay? I asked, trying to ease the tension in my neck. She looked at me and seemed to realize where she was, her cheeks turning red. Sorry. I just had a dream that it was your brother sending those emails to break us up. And then, after our divorce, he was trying to get too close to me. I was calling for you as he took off his pants. I went to my wife. We had been through a lot together, and this issue felt like just another problem caused by what I thought was my family, mainly my brother. Amy must have thought the same as we both looked at each other. Brad, we said at the same time. Hand me my phone, Robbie, Amy said. I handed it to her and asked, You are not going to do something risky, are you? She laughed softly. Of course not. Then she dialed a number. Hey, Dominic. Yes. I know it's late. You never sleep anyway. I need you to do something for me. It's really important. There's an email in my inbox from tonight with pictures of Robbie and his ex. Can you trace the email back to its source within the next day? She listened for a bit, shared some more details, and then hung up. It's done. Dominic will get the information for me. If it's from your brother or anyone else in that family, I'll make sure they face consequences. Amy gave me a small smile and reached out to me. Robbie, my love, I'm really sorry for reacting without talking to you first. Can you forgive me? I shrugged. It's okay, Amy. I probably would have reacted the same way. I'm also sorry this happened. I never thought those pictures would be seen by anyone, especially my wife and close friends. We talked for a while until Amy started to feel tired. I watched as she drifted off to sleep. In the morning, the hospital let her go. I brought her home, made her comfortable in bed with her laptop and phone, reminding her to take it easy. I worked from home that day. Things were quiet until lunchtime, when Amy got a message from Dominic. That's great, she said excitedly as I walked into the bedroom. It's confirmed. The email came from Brad Jr.'s phone. The tracking proves it. I'm going to prepare something for George. For the next hour, Amy worked on her laptop, and with my approval, she put together an email with her collected evidence for George. Just before she was about to send it, another email came in from the same address. Robbie? Amy said, her earlier excitement fading. Another email just arrived, with more attachments. She tried to stay calm. What should we do? I asked. I know we need to send it to George and the police, but could you look at the pictures and confirm they're what I think they are? I care about you, but I don't know if I can handle seeing you with my sister again. I nodded, a bit worried, and took Amy's laptop to open the attachments one by one. She carefully got up to head to the bathroom. I watched my pregnant wife move around the room. It was clear she had been through a lot in the past few days. I turned my attention to the screen and saw some pictures that once would have excited me. Now, though, I felt ashamed. My brother was trying to create problems between Amy and me using these images. The pictures showed some private moments I had with Georgia. There were several photos of us together, and even a couple of videos that felt like a betrayal now. One video was taken with the camera on our bedside table, showing us being intimate for about 3 minutes. The other video was more embarrassing, showing a private moment I didn't want anyone to see. I closed the video, feeling my face turn red. The email I had just read was clear. Amy, I'm sorry to say this, I can't stay quiet about your husband's past with his ex-wife. I can't believe they would be so disrespectful to take these pictures while married to other people. I hope you can use this in your divorce from someone who doesn't deserve you. Regards, a concerned citizen. As I finished reading, I felt angry at my brother. Just then, Amy walked back into the room and glanced at me, noticing my discomfort. Robbie, she said, holding her phone. I have George on the line. I've shared some details, and I can guess from your expression that the photos are even worse this time. Worse, I replied, feeling both angry and upset. Amy frowned, and I could see the emotions from the previous evening returning. We were both finding this difficult to handle. Can I put you on speaker, George? Amy asked. She looked at me. I'm sorry, Robbie, but we need to act quickly to stop this from happening again. I nodded. George, you're on speaker with Robbie and me, Amy said. Good, George replied. First things first. I know Amy is really upset, but how about you, Robbie? Are you okay? I paused for a moment, looking at Amy before answering. Sorry, George, yes, I'm here, but I'm not okay. In the last day, I felt incredibly embarrassed. My wife was ready to yell at me over something truly humiliating. We even worried about our baby's well-being because of the stress from the first email. I'm really angry, George, and seriously considering talking to my brother about his actions. I could hear George making notes. Robbie, as your lawyer, I'll just focus on finding a solution. But as your friend, I understand. I get it. You're not feeling good, but holding it together shows that you are a good, honorable man. Robbie, I am putting together a report that I plan to give to the police right away, saying that we will be filing charges against your brother and possibly your ex-wife. They could face several charges for invading your privacy. I need your okay to include some evidence, though. I know it's hard to think about, but it will help our case since you didn't allow anyone to see anything personal. Is that all right? George asked me. George? I said. Yes, Robbie? He replied over the phone. Do you need to see the evidence? He paused for a moment. Unfortunately, yes. As your lawyer in this case, I need to confirm what's in the evidence. I'm sorry, but I will be the only one to see it in my office. I promise to be very careful. George, I give my permission, and I trust you to be careful, I said, feeling a bit exposed. Thank you, Robbie, George said. Amy sat beside me on the bed. I know this is difficult, but I want to take strong action quickly. If everything goes well, Brad Jr. could even be taken in within 24 hours. Do it, I said, not hiding my anger. Amy turned off the speaker and talked to George for a few more minutes before ending the call. Were they really that bad? Amy asked as she sent the emails to George. I nodded. Do you want to talk about them? She asked quietly. Do you want to know? I replied. No. But if it would help, I will listen. Even after everything from yesterday, my wife said she was willing to be hurt to understand my past relationship with her older sister if it would help me. I sighed. Most of them were like the ones you saw yesterday. However, the videos were troubling in different ways. The first one was loving. Georgia and I were close. Did it upset you? Is that why you feel this way? Amy asked, reaching out to hold my hand. No, I replied, shaking my head. It's that other people have seen them. They show moments that were special between Georgia and me. It felt worse because it was something shared just between us, not just a casual encounter. I think I get it, Amy said, rubbing my arm. When we are close, when we look into each other's eyes, when I share my feelings with you during that time, I do that just for you. If anyone else were to see the moments we captured over the years, I understand, love. Robbie? Amy asked. I looked at her. Do you wish you hadn't taken any of the pictures or videos with Georgia? No, I shook my head. I think it surprised her. Why? She asked, a bit hurt. Because she was my wife, I explained. Those pictures and videos were private, something only we shared. After we broke up, I didn't keep them, but I can't regret creating them since they were made with love. I only regret that my brother somehow got hold of them. Amy took a moment to process that. I could see she was hurt. They were images of me with someone else, another woman, even though that woman was once my wife and her sister. But none of that mattered. It wasn't Amy. What about the pictures and videos we've made? Amy asked. With everything going on, do you regret those? She continued. I wasn't sure if she was hinting at getting rid of them or creating more memories. She left it open for me to decide. No way. I love our photos and videos. I enjoy looking back on our moments. They're part of why I love you, Amy. You're willing to share that with me. We aren't about showing them off to anyone else. But I know they're safe with you, just between us. Amy nodded and gave me a small smile. What about the second video? She asked, steering back to the original topic. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. It's okay. We need honesty right now. I took a breath. If the first video was us together in love, the second one was different. It showed a different side of things, something rougher, something I'm not proud of. For a moment, there was silence. Then I felt Amy's arms around me, her presence, comforting. Robbie, look at me, she said gently. I looked up, expecting anger or hurt, but I only saw understanding, maybe a bit of sadness. She was there for me. Robbie, John, Other, I love you so much. This isn't fair. Your family, getting in between us again. And while it's hard knowing there are photos of you with my sister like that, she stopped to gather her thoughts. This is hard to say, but while I know they exist, I also know you respected me enough to move on from them when we got together. You couldn't have known that your brother would dig them up and do this. It's low and I'm hurt, but I know you're probably feeling even worse. I nodded quietly. Robbie? Amy stood up, looking at me with purpose. Yes? I asked, watching her with curiosity. William's down for his nap. Why don't we make some new memories? She reached for my phone with a smile. Over the next little while, we took some photos, capturing her warmth and beauty. She smiled at each one, saving them in a safe folder afterward. Then we simply sat together, her hand resting on mine as we waited for William to wake up. Typically, we would share a close moment, but after yesterday, we both understood that would have to wait until our baby was born. Robbie? Amy asked after a while of us lying quietly together. Yes, I answered. Robbie, about those photos and videos of you and Georgia, she mentioned casually. Yes, I replied, feeling cautious. I sensed she wanted to discuss something important. Well, once our little one is born and I feel okay again, Amy said, rubbing her stomach. I shifted and propped myself on my elbow, now focused on her. She looked a bit nervous about what she wanted to say. After a sigh, she looked me in the eyes. Once we can be close again, I want to create our own memories, she said, hesitating a bit. I want you to film us so you think of me and not her. The look on my face showed my surprise. Why? Those photos and videos hurt us, she explained. They have taken hold of your mind. I want to change that. I want to make new memories together. But Amy, I started, but she interrupted me with a giggle. But, she said, smiling. We both laughed for a moment. Amy, I understand, but we've never been that adventurous before. We've tried some things, but not like that. She sighed. Robbie, we need to take it slow. I know it won't just happen. I'll need lots of care and preparation. But when the time comes, I want it to be a wonderful experience, even better than what you've seen. We talked about it for a few minutes. Amy was determined, and I agreed that once she was ready after the baby, we could explore this together. We heard William starting to wake up. Thank you, Robbie. You go get William and I'll get dressed, Amy told me. If you're good, I'll make sure to reward you later. The next day, I heard news during lunch that my brother had been arrested. The police showed up early that morning at his workplace because they had a warrant. The story even made it to the evening news, explaining that a local man had been taken in for sharing private photos of his wife to harm her new relationship. My brother was seen leaving in handcuffs, with his company's name mentioned in the report. Georgia was questioned too, but she was released after a while, although they told her not to leave town. Reporters tried to speak to my father, but he pushed through them, refusing to comment. Later, that day, I received a call from an unknown number. It turned out to be my mother. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself for what was coming. Why, Robbie? She asked, sounding upset. Why did you do that to your brother? After all these years, do you still dislike us so much that you do this to him? She complained to me. Hold on, Hattie, I didn't do anything. Your son sent those photos and videos to Amy saying I was involved with Georgia. We are just responding to what he has done. You should check your facts before blaming me. There was a long silence. You're not lying, are you? My mother finally asked. Your father and brother are insisting that you set Brad up. Hattie, Mum, I replied. In all these years, through all this conflict and pain, have I ever lied to any of you about what really happened? Well, no, but I know how much you dislike us, she said back. I took a deep breath. Mum, think about it. Why would I want to embarrass myself by sharing such personal moments with Georgia? That makes no sense. I don't want anyone to see me like that. I'm done with it. That does make sense, Mum admitted. But Robbie, your brother has been arrested. Can't you just drop the charges? He never charged you when you hurt him. She sounded desperate. No, Mum, I can't. What happened between Brad and me was just between us. What he did affected not just me, but also Amy and Georgia, who is now his wife. No matter what else happened, that is something I can't overlook. Even if I didn't want to press charges, which I do, he broke several serious laws. The police take that very seriously these days. Okay, Robbie, I understand. I could hear the regret in her voice. I'm sorry we're making your life difficult again. For a moment, we were both quiet. Robbie? I heard her voice shake as she asked. Yes, Mum? I don't know why I called her that again. I had only done it once or twice before, but it felt right somehow. I hear that I have another grandchild? she asked softly, as if even talking about it might upset me. I sighed. Yes, you have one grandson named William, and soon you'll have a second, I told her. I heard her start to cry. I'm sorry, Robbie. I can't do this, she said, and then hung up. For the first time in many years, I felt some sympathy for a family member. At first, my mother showed no regret for the family's choices, but over time I noticed she had tried to apologize several times. Was I open to forgiving her? I wasn't sure. There was no chance for Dad, Brad, or Joanna, but maybe for Mum. Just maybe. I had a thoughtful expression on my face as I took breakfast to Amy in bed. What's on your mind? She asked, noticing the tray I set down next to her. It had tea and a croissant with jam. I just had a talk with my mom, I said softly, gazing at the ocean from our deck. She nodded. Did she give you a hard time about Brad's arrest? Not really, but I told her to get the facts right before blaming me. We also talked about William and the baby. I even called her Mom instead of Hattie. That must have surprised her, Amy said, taking a bite of her croissant and dropping some crumbs on her pregnant belly. Our son, William, entered the room and climbed onto the bed, giving Amy a kiss on her belly. Moments later, he reached for her croissant. We played with him for a bit. He was getting braver every day and soon wandered off to watch his favorite show on TV. We both smiled, knowing we would need to set some rules about screen time and encourage him to play outside more often. Living by the beautiful coast made it easier to think he would enjoy outdoor activities, but we would need to be deliberate about it. I looked back at Amy. She was sipping her tea. I knew she wasn't a big fan, but she chose to avoid coffee until the baby arrived. Once she was ready for her coffee again, I planned to run to our local coffee shop every day for her favorite latte. It was a brief but interesting conversation, I continued, as if our son hadn't interrupted us. Mom was quiet but hung up quickly when I mentioned William and that we're expecting another baby. Amy stared at me for a moment. She's feeling the weight of everything happening in the family, Amy said. I think you're right, I replied. No, Robbie, try to see it from her side, Amy advised, shifting to find a comfortable position for her belly. A few years ago, she almost lost her youngest child while trying to help her oldest. Why? Because she was becoming a grandmother. She probably thought things would get better and you would come back to her life. But that didn't happen, and with everything else going on, her life has become quite hard. Her husband's business is struggling partly because of you starting your own. Then her other kids made some surprising choices, and her daughter-in-law had a baby with the wrong person. Twice. Now her estranged son has married someone special, built a strong business that competes with the family, and is having children, her grandchildren, that she may never get to see because of how the family has treated him. Amy looked at me with understanding. For all these years, Amy never talked to me about how my family might feel about what happened. She continued speaking. As a mother, she must feel like she has failed. Worse, she couldn't protect you and had to let you go, knowing her other two kids are not doing well. When she talks to you, it brings up all that hurt, Amy said. But I didn't break the trust, I responded. I did everything I could to help them, and they destroyed my whole world, including Mom. Amy raised her hand while she took another sip of her tea from the bedside table. I'm not saying what she did is okay, Amy said, nor the pain she feels now being away from you and hearing about our kids. She couldn't even come to our wedding. She had to stay away and watch from a distance. She's facing the consequences of her actions, and it's not easy for her. From what I see, everyone around her, her children and her husband, has let her down repeatedly. In the few times we've seen her in the last few years, I can see it in her eyes. The regret you said wasn't there that first night is there now. We sat in silence for a couple of minutes, my shoulders feeling heavy. I don't want to forgive her, Amy. I want to keep hating her. I want to keep hating all of them, I said sadly. Then my wife's arms wrapped around me, her pregnant belly pressing against my side, reminding me that I had a new family. You don't have to forgive them, my love. But maybe it's time to let go of some of that hate, even if it's just for your mother, she said gently. I need to think. All right, I replied, and Amy smiled at me. I understand. How about you go work out for a bit? Darren and Tony will be here soon, and I know Darren will push you hard this week to get ready for your upcoming fight. We talked about the fight for a few minutes. This would be my third professional fight since I won against Cody. In Los Angeles, I lost on points. The guy was really good, and we both gave it our all. He was a well-known fighter from Europe, and afterwards he was one of the friendliest people I had ever met in boxing. I won my next fight in Johannesburg. The opponent was full of confidence, and I think he believed too much in his own hype. I took him down in the third round with a strong combination of hits that left him unable to continue. In my last fight, I lost. It was a tough 5 rounds. My opponent was Canadian and very strong. He pushed me hard the whole time, and I did my best to defend myself. I avoided being knocked out, but he won fairly. Besides my professional fights, I also had many local fights, where I built a reputation as a strong competitor. Honestly, I enjoyed being fit and letting out my frustrations by sparring in the ring. This time, my opponent would be another top American MMA fighter. He had won many more matches than he had lost, and I was considered a long shot to win. Blaine Johnston was a fighter in every way. He was known for being tough in the ring and trained in different martial arts. Right now, Blaine was on a worldwide tour, while American fighters were taking a break to get new sponsors for next year. He had 2 matches scheduled in Australia. Last month, he easily beat another Australian fighter. Next week, it was my turn. With everything happening in the past few weeks, my training had not been great, and I didn't feel fully prepared, even though Darren was pushing me harder than ever. The reporters and sports commentators were back too. This fight was going to be shown live around the world. It was mainly for Blaine, but since I was a favorite Australian champion after my fight with Cody, I hoped it would give me good exposure. I just wanted to avoid embarrassing myself too much. My main supporters were, as usual, Darren and Tony. Amy was there, but since she was about to have our second child in a couple of weeks, she would be in the special seating with her family. Ruth, Peter, and Rain would sit with her. After the fight, Peter and Rain were coming back to help Amy get ready for the baby. Darren was wrapping my arms when Blaine walked in. "So, you're Robbie Other?" he said, looking me up and down. I felt like he was judging me. "You'll do," he said with a smirk, then turned and walked away. Darren whistled. "That's a good sign." I looked at him. Usually, he just sizes up his opponents, snorts, and leaves, Darren explained. "I think he's going to take you seriously. You might have a chance." We spent the next half hour discussing strategies, such as how I should move, and how to defend myself. We went over my weaknesses and talked about Blaine's. Tony stepped out to get Amy and her family to come say good luck before the fight. But when they arrived, they brought someone I did not expect, my mother. Mom, what are you doing here?" I asked, feeling a mix of confusion and irritation. "It was my fault, Robbie," Amy said. "Please don't be upset. Last week I thought it would be good for her to come for just the fight." Now, I was annoyed with my very pregnant wife. A storm of emotions rushed through me as I looked at her. Not what I needed right before a match. Mom turned away. "I'm sorry, Robbie, I shouldn't have come. This was a mistake." As she began to walk away, I acted without thinking. I stepped toward her and did the only thing I could think of. I embraced her tightly. In moments, my mother was crying in my arms. It was just the two of us, despite the crowd around us. I gently pushed Mom back to look into her eyes. She tried to smile, but it didn't quite show on her face. "It's okay, Mom. You don't have to leave," I said. "Are you sure? I mean..." Mom looked uncertain. "Yes," I said. "It's all right. As long as it's just you and nobody else." She shook her head. "No, it's just me. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't want to risk not seeing you." Then she hugged me tightly. "Oh, my dear boy, I love you so much. I am so sorry for how we treated you. We should not have acted that way, and we deserve everything that has happened." I gently patted her back, unsure of what to say after all this time. "It's okay, Mom. There will be plenty of time for apologies later. Right now, I need to go and focus on this fight. Will you watch with Amy?" She nodded. I then received good luck wishes from everyone before stepping into the ring. Blaine smiled at me as I entered a few minutes later. "This should be easier than I thought," he said, having seen the moment with my mother. The bell rang, and I felt the impact from the very first moment. Blaine was quick for his size. His punches hit hard and his kicks were well placed. I was surprised I made it through the first round. At the end of the round, Darren looked at me and pushed me, urging me to get my head in the game. In round 2, I stood my ground better, but I was still getting hit hard. I glanced over at my mother and saw the worry on her face. I looked at Amy and saw her concern, too. My mind just wasn't in this fight. So much had happened, and seeing Mom, then her crying in my arms, left me feeling lost. I stumbled through the rest of the round, and as I tried to regroup, Amy and my mother came over to me as Darren checked me out. I looked at Amy, then at Mom. Then to my surprise, she slapped me. I was shocked, and I bet every camera in the place caught that moment. "Robert John Other, I did not raise a weak son," she said firmly. "I apologized for what we did to you, but if it's going to make you weak, then I take it back. Where's the fighter we saw that night? Where is the man who stood up for himself?" "I was angry, Mom," I replied, still feeling the sting of her slap. Seeing all of you and then Brad with his hands all over Georgia made me mad. It made me want to fight, but that anger is gone now. "Well, forget that," my mother said, surprising me with her language. "Robbie, look at this." She showed me her phone with a picture of Brad, Georgia, and their child. "This guy," Mom said angrily, "he took your wife. Got her pregnant without telling you and made you feel alone while making fun of you behind your back for years. He got your father and sister to see you as less of a man, and I was fooled by his lies for a while, too. For goodness sake, Robbie, he sent photos and videos of you with Georgia to Amy just to break you up. Use that anger, son. Use the hurt we caused you. Use the fact that my oldest son seems to be failing as motivation, and show that Blaine guy what you've got. Picture it as if it's your brother who needs a lesson. Prove to us that you're strong." With that, my mom walked away and sat down. Amy, Tony, Darren, and I just watched her leave. "Go get him, my friend," Amy said with a smile as she followed Mom. "What she said," Darren added, trying not to smile too much. Mom's words worked. In the next round, I fought back. I started moving quicker. I avoided his hardest hits and even got a few of my own in. If I had heard the commentators, I would have known they were talking about the motivational speech my mother gave during the break. When the third round ended, I noticed Blaine had lost some of his confidence and was starting to fight smarter. In the fourth round, we clashed again. Blaine went down twice as he struggled against my renewed energy. By the end of the fourth round, I had a cut above my eye that Darren quickly bandaged before the fifth round. I felt more balanced in the fight. It had turned into a tough battle, and I could hear the crowd cheering in the background. In the final round, I made real progress. Blaine had started strong, thinking I was off my game, but now he was tiring. I began to focus on breaking through his defense, steadily targeting his weak spots. I knew we would both have aches and bruises when this was over. I caught a few lucky breaks. When Blaine misjudged a kick, it opened up a chance for me to land several hits to his midsection. A moment later, he came at me with a series of punches that I dodged while hitting him again. He switched to a defensive stance, so I pushed him hard again. With each hit, I remembered my mother's advice and imagined my brother was the one I was fighting. Instead of seeing Blaine, I pictured Brad teasing me about how he had tricked me again. I landed more and more blows on Blaine. I imagined Brad bragging about how he found the photos on George's phone and sent them to Amy to make us split up. I worked to keep my anger in check and focused. Blaine was fully defending himself now, trying to survive until the end of the round and the match. Meanwhile, my anger fueled my strength. He didn't realize I wasn't just fighting him anymore. I was standing up to my family, who had pushed me around for so long, using me to get their way just because they could. The fight ended with less than a minute to go. I took a deep breath, realizing I was becoming too angry, so I stepped back to calm myself. Blaine saw this as a chance and tried to hit me a few times. I was ready for him. When he rushed at me, I pretended to punch him, which made him drop his guard. He didn't see the kick coming. It caught him off balance, and he fell to his knees, surprised. I quickly moved in and kept him down until he gave up. It was a solid win. The referee raised my hand with the microphone. "Your winner and our Australian champion, Robert Other," he announced, and the crowd cheered. Before leaving the ring, I helped Blaine up. He was still a bit dazed, but the headlines next week would show me helping a defeated opponent, and people would talk about the Aussie spirit for days. As I walked Blaine to his team, he looked at me confused. "Who were you fighting out there, champ? It didn't feel like me," he said as one of his trainers assisted him. I laughed. "My older brother. Mom always reminded me of him." He chuckled. "I wouldn't want to be your brother. Thanks for a great fight, Robbie." He smiled and shook my hand, looking grateful. I nodded as I handed him off to his team. My own team surrounded me next. First was Amy, and we shared a deep kiss, her belly gently touching mine. Then came Darren, Tony, Peter, Rain, and Ruth. Finally, my mom came over. I opened my arms for her. "Thanks, Mom," I said softly as she hugged me tightly. We headed to the dressing room and Darren helped me cool down. I hopped into the shower and Amy joined me moments later. It was now a tradition for her to shower with me after a fight. Even though I felt a bit playful, we both knew we had to take it easy after what happened in the hospital. As we dried off and got dressed, Amy asked if I was okay with her bringing my mom in without asking me first. I sighed and replied, "Honestly, I was all over the place, but you did the right thing. If it weren't for Mom, I might not have won tonight." Amy looked at me intently. "Really?" "Amy, I might have been more focused at the start if she hadn't been there. But Blaine was going to be tough for me. especially with everything I've been dealing with these past few weeks. Mom knew how to motivate me and reminded me to find the strength I needed to face someone as skilled as Blaine. Even though I enjoy this, it's not my main job. If it weren't for Darren encouraging me, I wouldn't have taken the fight. But tonight, I needed that anger to help me win. "Are you going to forgive her?" she asked, adjusting her maternity bra and pulling her shirt over her head. "I think I did tonight when I confronted her." I sighed. "Amy, I really mean it. I'm feeling confused right now. I don't know what my relationship with Mom will be going forward. I can say I forgive her, but I don't know where to go from here. And to be honest, I'm not anywhere close to forgiving Dad and Brad." I sat down to put on my shoes. Amy leaned over and hugged me. I cherish my wife. "It's okay, love. I don't think I can forgive them either. Just know that whatever you choose, I'll be here supporting you." We talked more as we finished getting ready, while everyone else waited outside the locker room with security guards. I could hear fans asking for my autograph, which was a first for me. Reporters asked about the fight, and some tried to talk to my mother, who seemed surprised by all the attention. As I headed to the interview area, security kept the crowd back. "Robbie, is everything your mother said to you during the fight tonight true?" one reporter asked as I sat down. The question surprised me. I'd forgotten that the microphones picked up conversations in the ring. Usually they played snippets of trainers, but I guess this was the first time they caught something personal. Sorry everyone. That was a private matter." "I would appreciate a bit of privacy if you don't mind," I replied, knowing they'd be curious but hoping to have a moment to gather my thoughts tonight. "Mr. Other," another reporter started, "did your mother slap you?" I chuckled. That was pretty clear if you were watching. The reporters shifted, buzzing with that question. "I just mentioned that most of what you want to ask me is private. Yes, it was recorded, and I know it's out there. But everything happened so quickly tonight. I'd like some time to sort through my feelings and give you answers that make sense. I will admit there have been issues in my family, like in many families over the years. Yes, those things played a part in tonight's fight. However, after my wife has our second child, I'd be willing to sit down with each of your networks and discuss it if you could give us some space for now. But right now, I am tired after an incredible match, and I want to care for my family. If you have more questions about the match and not my family, I can answer them," I said. This quieted most of the reporters, and everyone agreed to focus on the family side for a few days. I knew this wouldn't last, though. Soon, all the news outlets would likely be looking into the Other family. Sarah Marie Other was born 2 weeks after the big match. She was perfect and arrived crying loudly until she was placed in Amy's arms to feed. Amy was worn out after a long labor which lasted 22 hours, but she went through it like a trooper. Tired as she was, my wife had a brightness in her eyes that showed how much she loved our daughter. I kissed her and told her how proud I was. Darren and Tony brought William in, and together we celebrated Sarah with joyful sounds. In the following days, many from Alro and Alro Homes came to visit, along with Peter, Rain, and Ruth. But even with the excitement of our new arrival, some reporters were eager to meet our daughter. The match had gained a lot of attention. Winning was a big deal for Australian sports. But the situation surrounding my family became an even bigger topic on social media. The scandal was so intense that my father had asked my mother to leave their home because of all the attention from reporters. The enemy, in this case, was me. So in an awkward moment, we had my mother sign a privacy agreement and she became part of our lives again. Mom stayed in one of the extra bedrooms and spent time with William when she could. She was very taken with our new baby girl. At first it was a bit strange when either Amy or I were around because there was still some hurt feelings between us. However, Mom had gone through many tough situations and managed to handle this one well. I wasn't sure if we would ever really reconnect, but she did apologize that night and offered a few more apologies as we prepared for Sarah's birth. One thing I noticed was that Mom often seemed lost in thought unless she was playing with William or trying to stay out of the way around Amy and me with Sarah. More than once I found her on the balcony looking out at the ocean with a drink in hand, gazing into the distance. It was during those moments that we had some of our best conversations. Mom shared her feelings about the pain and regret of our family being apart. When my parents told me that evening that they had often considered how to tell me about Georgia and Brad's affair, my mom had wished to find the right words. But Dad always said, no. He knew that I needed to keep making money for everyone, and my mother apologized for not being brave enough to stand up to my father. One time we talked, she explained that when Brad and Georgia had a baby, there was a big family meeting. They decided I should go to Perth for 3 nights to help with a problem caused by Joanna. My mother told me there was a lot of arguing at the meeting. Georgia and my mother wanted to tell me the truth, knowing it would hurt me. But my father, brother, and sister disagreed. Even though I might not have been truly accepted in the family, I was also seen as someone valuable. They didn't want to disrupt things, even if they didn't really consider me a part of their family. My mother said that my father made Georgia go home with Brad that night, and all her complaints faded away. She felt pressured and even threatened with divorce if she didn't follow his wishes. Sadly, she told me that after that night, my parents never shared a bed again. She moved into a spare room, and my father refused to change. The night I found out the truth and faced my parents, what I thought was rejection from my mother was really guilt and shame pushed onto her by my father. After I stormed out for seeing my brother with Georgia, Brad called my parents. My father told my mother not to say anything or she would deeply regret it. He warned her that if I didn't accept things, I would be out of the family. I decided to leave before he could act on that threat. In the months that followed, every time my mother and I talked, she cried. She felt a lot of regret and asked me for forgiveness each time. But tonight, as we began our conversation, she seemed different. She was more quiet and emotional. There were no tears at first. As we spoke, I looked out at the horizon and saw that the moon would be full tonight. Together we watched the sunset over the ocean from the balcony. As my mother sipped her wine, I noticed she looked at me carefully. I had seen this a few times over the past weeks. She was present, but a part of her felt distant. I sipped my drink and thought about our situation. I was with my mother again. My body was healing from my fight. My son was happy, my daughter was lovely, and my wife was wonderful and supportive. I felt like I had my mother back in my life to some extent. Mom broke the silence, interrupting my thoughts. Robbie, I know I've said I'm sorry so many times, but I also want to thank you, she told me after a long pause as we continued watching the sunset. I glanced at her, curiosity in my eyes. You took a chance with me a couple of months ago, she said. You could have easily turned me away, and I would have left. But I've had the chance to meet my wonderful grandchildren. I have been lucky to see how well you are doing after everything. Mum smiled to herself. I also got to see your lovely wife and how happy she makes you. I'm so glad to see that you and Amy share a stronger bond than you ever did with Georgia. Finally, I got the chance to reconnect with you. I know it has been hard, but you have tried, and I appreciate that. She looked out at the ocean, a gentle tear rolling down her cheek. Now I feel at peace. I caught her last words. Mum, what did you say? I asked, putting my drink down. Robbie, my dear boy, she said slowly. I'm not well. No one except my doctor knows, not even your father. I have been living with a serious illness for the past 2 years. The pain has become worse lately. Only the thought of seeing you again kept me going. Now I can barely move my head and am losing my sight. I rushed to her side, tears in my eyes. No, Mum. Please, no. There must be something. Anything we can do. Despite everything, she was still my mom, and I loved her. The thought of losing her felt unbearable. She smiled softly, running her hands through my hair like she did when I was a child. It's too late for that, Robbie. I've been holding on these last few months just to make some final memories with you and your lovely family before I go. When she said go, I understood she meant something different. Mum, what about Dad? He needs you, I said urgently, not caring that I was mentioning someone I disliked. She let out a soft laugh. Robbie, he hasn't spoken kindly to me in a long time, Mum said sadly. Your father has been seeking other relationships for years because I wouldn't give in until he apologized to you. I felt anger bubbling inside me, but this wasn't about him. But Mum, it's not fair, I said, feeling upset. It's all right, Robbie, Mum sighed. I think she understood my frustration with her words. What matters is that I got to see you again. You are the best part of us, never forget that. Her hand left my hair and I looked up at her. Would you sit with me? Hold my hand? And let me watch the sunset with you? Mum asked. She smiled as I settled beside her, taking her hand in mine. One last happy memory, she whispered. The sunset was beautiful that evening, colors shifting from yellows and oranges to reds near the water, blending into purples and blues in the sky. The gentle breeze surrounded us, and at some point, William came out and sat in Mum's lap. Amy and Sarah came out and we all sat together watching the sunset and then the moon rise. We were there as a family. My feelings were strong. Sometimes I met Mum's gaze. She smiled, and even with the sad news, I could tell she was happy. As the moon climbed higher, I heard Mum sigh and breathe out slowly. Surrounded by my family, she slipped into a deep sleep. For 3 days, she held on. A large tumor was pressing on her brain, stopping the blood flow. She never woke up. Though I felt anger towards my family, I tried to reach out, but I never got a response. On the second day, news got out because several news vans set up outside the hospital, eager for updates on the mother of a famous fighter. Information spread quickly and highlights from my past fights were shown on the evening news. We didn't hear from Dad, Joanna, or Brad, who was still in custody and couldn't visit. But Georgia showed up one morning with Peter and Rain. We let Georgia say her goodbyes. I learned that Mum had been the only one in the family who treated her kindly in recent years. As she left with tears in her eyes, Georgia handed me a letter. She asked me to read it in a few months when things calmed down. She left almost as quickly as she came. Mum passed away that afternoon, and the news reported it widely. Because of my public image, her death was shared in Australia and even on sports channels around the world, highlighting how she had supported me through tough times. At her funeral, many people attended. Some were old friends who came after seeing the news, and others were former co-workers who remembered her as a kind woman. Georgia came with Peter, Rain, and Ruth, but Dad, Brad Jr., and Joanna were not there. I had mixed feelings about this. Part of me was upset that those who had been cared for by her didn't come to say goodbye. But I understood. With the media watching, they may not want to cause more trouble. Total Build closed 2 days after my last fight, with rumors suggesting that the bad news and my brother's issues could lead to its permanent closure. I was asked to speak at the podium for the eulogy. Honestly, it would be tough in front of friends, family, and the press. I had to move past a lot of anger from the past few years. I placed my notes on the stand and looked out at everyone. In the back, I noticed a few people trying to blend in, and I realized that for the first time, I could speak my truth. My family did not hold me back this time. I looked at Amy, holding Sarah, and William sitting next to her, gazing up at me, his father. I glanced at Darren and Tony. I even noticed Georgia, whose face showed sadness. But when our eyes met, each one of them, even my ex-wife, offered a sad smile. "Good afternoon, everyone," I began to the gathered group of mourners. "I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate the life of Hattie Edwina Other, my mother. It's no secret that my family has faced many challenges over the past few years. There were soft murmurs in the crowd and even a few quiet laughs. But the truth is, for many years, the only words I exchanged with my mother were filled with anger about our family troubles. It felt to me like my mother and the rest of my family had turned away from me, treating me like someone who existed just to help them, not as a son who needed support. I recently learned that my mother, in her own way, fought against this for a long time. The night of that difficult moment you all witnessed was the first time in years that I could hug her. That night, I found it in my heart to forgive her. Once again, there were whispers among the crowd. I spent the last couple of months reconnecting with my mother. We talked about many things, including feelings and anger. I began to see that my mother was caught in a tough situation. She could support me and risk losing her ties with her friends and family. Or she could let me go to keep her connection with her husband and children, grandchildren, and others. She chose to protect her grandkids, feeling she had no choice but to stand apart from me, her son, because those grandchildren were innocent. It took me a long time to understand her viewpoint. Not long ago, Amy pointed this out to me based on her own experience as a mother. Even now, as I speak to all of you about Mom, I still feel anger. But I loved my Mom, and I know she loved me too. I paused for a moment, wiped my eyes, and noticed several others doing the same. When I spoke again, my voice trembled. "Amy, my children and I were with Mom when she peacefully drifted off." It was a lovely afternoon like this one, as we watched the sun set and the moon rise. We did not need to say much. Just being with each other was enough. Mom told me that evening she wanted to make one last joyful memory, and I was grateful to be part of it. To me, it will always be a moment of calm amidst the storms of our lives. Over these past months, my mom showed me a strength I hadn't recognized before. She felt a deep pain from losing contact with one of her children for the sake of everyone else. It took some small but important moments, thanks to my wife and her family, for us to reconnect. I wiped tears from my eyes, trying hard to breathe normally before I spoke again. This afternoon, as we remember my mother's life, I choose to focus on the good times. I think of my loving and caring mother who helped me learn to ride my bike for the first time. I recall her worry when I came back from my first sleepover at 8 years old. I remember her happiness at my graduation and how content she was when she held my children just a couple of months ago. I wish we had more time to fix our problems, but I am grateful to have been there at the end to hear her say how much she loved all of us. Goodbye, Mom. I will love you forever and keep you in my memories. As I stepped down from the podium, I noticed everyone was wiping their eyes, even some reporters who had quietly joined us. Mom was cremated, so there was no body to lay to rest, but a plaque in her memory was placed at a cemetery on the Gold Coast. After the crowd left, I stood with Amy and the family, including Darren and Tony, and we raised a toast to Mom one last time. While we were packing up, I noticed a woman standing alone in the background. She had also been at the funeral, staying at the back. I whispered to Amy, and she quickly glanced at the woman and nodded. She gathered everyone and left me standing next to Mom's plaque. I stood there for about 5 minutes before the woman approached me. "You spoke beautifully," she said, her hand grazing the plaque. "Thanks," I replied simply. "Not much sympathy for your family, though," she said. "Not much to give after what they did to me," I answered with a hint of bitterness. "Come on, Robbie," she said, looking at me with disapproval. "After all these years, you're still hanging on to that anger?" I nodded. "Yes, because whenever I try to move on, someone brings it all back. If it wasn't you, it was Dad. If it wasn't him, it was Brad. If it wasn't Brad, it was Georgia. Despite what you all said about me being out of the family, you had a strange way of showing it." She seemed taken aback. "I guess we deserve that, but Robbie..." She trailed off. "You get what you and your family have caused, Joanna," I said, saying my sister's name for the first time. "Your father and brother only think of themselves, and you were always the one who never wanted to grow up, doing the least amount of work to get the praise." I felt my anger rising. Joanna stood silent. "You never defended me because whenever they put me down, it meant you were one step above me," I said, upset with my sister. "You could have stopped Brad and Georgia back then. You could have prevented this mess, but you wanted to have something to use against me. You thought it made you better than me. So, you agreed to keep it all a secret. But when it all came to light, you were embarrassed. That day you showed up at my house ready to confront me, but your secret didn't hold any power over me anymore." She looked down, knowing I was right. "But I need to thank you," I said, changing my tone. Joanna looked at me with confusion. "The day you came to Darren and Tony's, you brought me my wife, the love of my life. I'm much happier with Amy than I ever would have been with Georgia, even if she hadn't been unfaithful," I told my sister. "Why?" she asked. "Because Amy loves me completely. Georgia and I got married for other reasons. Even now, I think our dad may have influenced that choice. If Georgia hadn't been unfaithful with Brad, it would have happened with someone else eventually. We just weren't a good match like Amy and I are." Joanna nodded slowly. "I think that was the same for Chris and me." I raised an eyebrow. She laughed a little. "Yeah, I know you heard about that. How foolish was I? I let my fiancé betray me, and now I'm single, feeling down and pretty much out of work since my brother tried to get back at you. Chris was a mistake. I let Dad decide for us." "Joanna, "No, Robbie. I couldn't say it then, but I will now," she interrupted. "I'm sorry for everything. You were right about so much, and I'm glad you're doing well without Mom, with Brad in prison and Total Build closed. I'm moving south." "Where?" I asked, mostly out of curiosity. She thought for a moment before answering. "Melbourne," she finally said. "I still have a few friends who will talk to me after everything. I need to go somewhere where people don't know me, so I can escape the label that I feel stuck with." I nodded in understanding. "Robbie, do you think?" She hesitated. "Do you think one day you might forgive me like you did Mom?" she asked, a hint of hope in her voice. I sighed. "Joanna, I honestly don't know. I won't forget what happened. You played a major role in my hurt. But the fact that we're not shouting at each other right now tells me I might be open to it one day." She shrugged. "I guess that's all I can hope for." She looked at me, studying my face for a moment, then sighed with a similar expression I had just shown. "Robbie, Dad has been harsh about you for years, calling you ungrateful and disappointing. We all believed him for a long time. because we relied on you for our comfort. We always followed Dad because he would help us carry our burdens." Joanna paused and looked at me. "I talked to Dad yesterday about leaving, and he blamed you. He says you broke the family. But I know it wasn't your fault. It was him." She glanced at the plaque with Mum's name, reaching out to touch it before looking back at me, her eyes glistening. "I'm glad you were there at the end. I'm glad her last moments were with the best of us," my sister said sadly. I turned to Joanna, confused. "What did you say?" "When I met with Mum for coffee, I sometimes complained about you. She always stopped me, saying we were the ones who messed up, not you. She would say you were the best of us." "Why?" I touched the plaque, too. "She told me something like that. I don't know if I deserve it." I felt tears coming. "I'm going to miss her, Joe." Then Joanna did something surprising. She stepped toward me, wrapped her arms around me, and hugged me. As kids, she never hugged me. We only did high fives. I could feel her tears on my chest as she let out all her feelings. "Don't you dare, Robbie. Don't lessen Mum's words," she whispered. "Mum was right. You are the best of us. You didn't play Dad's games. I'm sorry it took me so long to realize that. I just hope I can get my life back on track." She let go of the hug and walked away. "Just a few steps from me," I called out. "Joanna." She turned to look at me. I hesitated, seeing her eyes. I struggled for a moment, unsure of what to say. "I forgive you," I finally said. Saying it hurt, but I felt a little lighter inside. Joanna's eyes widened in surprise. She stared at me for a moment, then nodded slowly, and left. It would be a few years before we saw each other again. I went back to the car where Amy and the kids were waiting. Amy had finished buckling them in and hugged me. I saw Joanna leave. She looked like she was crying. "Are you okay?" my wife asked, worry in her eyes. "Yeah," I replied softly. "We were civil. I chose to let go of my anger and told her I forgive her." Amy's eyes widened like Joanna's had moments before. She knew I had blamed Joanna for keeping my brother's secret. She hugged me again. "You're a good man, Robbie." I scoffed a little. "It's not like we will ever be a family. I still don't like her much. I think it's time to let go of my feelings toward her and focus on my life." I glanced in the direction she had gone. She was out of sight, but I could imagine her walking away, feeling very sad, having lost so much. She told me she's moving to Melbourne to start fresh. I pondered this for a moment. If she can change her ways and become independent, maybe she will grow and improve. We got back in the car for the long drive home. The kids were sleeping in the back while Amy and I chatted quietly about work, parenting, and my past challenges. "I think I have only one or two more big fights left in me," I said to Amy. "I'm getting older, and while I love the training and the focus it requires, I don't enjoy the attention from the media after the last fight." Amy chuckled. "Besides, I have a wife and two kids to think about. I would like to stay fit and maybe even find someone to mentor." "Like a young apprentice?" Amy teased, referencing characters from her favorite series, Star Wars. I laughed. "Kind of. I've been really busy for several years," I shared. "With family issues, building the business, my fights, and looking after our kids." I gestured to them in the back seat. "I admit I'm feeling a bit worn out and taking it a bit easier." "For years sounds appealing," Amy smirked. "Sorry, honey, but you wouldn't know how to slow down if it hit you. Even if you tried, I don't think life will let you take it easy. Drama seems to follow us, and that's what keeps things interesting." I sighed, knowing she was right. The next few months were easier. I took some time to grieve for my mother. I spent lots of time with William and Sarah and worked a few hours a day at Alro Homes. I also kept my promise to do interviews for my fights. I wasn't thrilled about it, but a marketing consultant Amy hired convinced me it was better to show a positive side to the media, or they might create their own stories. One great thing was that I secured a couple of big sponsors for clothing and workout equipment. Amy and I were invited to spend a few weekends with a Hollywood celebrity who has his own fitness brand. He and his wife were fun to be around, and we agreed to get together every few months to share stories. Amy also reminded me to stick to my promise of replacing those unwanted images and clips with our own memories. My wife had a stunning presence in those clips, and focusing on our shared moments helped me move past those memories. Sure, I still remember those images, but whenever I thought of them, my mind often turned to Amy, which helped me forget what my brother had done. It had been 6 months since Mum passed away, and Amy and I were starting to find a routine in our lives with work, kids, and each other. It wasn't always easy, but it was our life. And Amy was right. Even when I wanted to take things slow, life kept pushing me forward. What was interesting was that both Amy and I were witnesses in my older brother's trial. He had been out on bail for a while, wearing a GPS tracker and not allowed to contact us. During the trial, we sat in the courtroom listening to the prosecutor describe Brad as a terrible person with few good qualities. Words like bully and selfish were thrown around. His defense tried to say he was a victim of circumstances, but nobody believed that. The only person supporting him besides his attorney was my father, Brad Sr. When Dad saw me in the back of the room, he kept looking at me with a glare. Unlike Mom and Joanna, he didn't want to fix things between us, and honestly, I was okay with that. After his company, Total Build, closed down, he struggled to find work, especially after the news painted him badly following my fight with Blaine. Another witness was Georgia. My ex-wife didn't look well. She had always been slim, but now she seemed even more stressed and worn down. Her body language showed defeat as she sat with her back to us. If I could see her face, I knew her eyes would look tired. Amy and I were not called to testify. Our statements were submitted formally through George to the police. To be honest, I didn't think Brad's defense would want us on the stand since we might make things worse for him. Georgia, however, had to take the stand. When she first saw me, she gave me a sad smile. I could tell she was tired, with dark circles under her eyes. The defense lawyer began to ask questions. Mrs. Other, can you tell us your relationship with the defendant? Mr. Brad Other Jr. is my husband, Georgia answered in a flat voice, showing no feeling. And do you have any children with him? The lawyer asked, possibly trying to build a family image for Brad. No, we do not have children together, she replied in the same flat tone. A small murmur went through the room. I glanced at Georgia, then at Brad, who was next to my father, and finally at Amy, who also looked confused. Brad glared at Georgia with a look full of anger. My father somehow managed to both smirk and give her a disapproving look. Georgia stood her ground without hesitation. You mean you have a son and a daughter with your husband? The lawyer tried to clarify. No, my son and daughter have different fathers, Georgia explained to the court. My husband is not the father of either child. Whispers filled the room, and the judge had to tap his gavel for silence. The lawyer looked at Georgia and cleared his throat. For a moment, I felt a sense of panic. If Brad wasn't the father, could it be that I was her son's father? Regardless of where they come from, you are raising 2 children with the defendant. Georgia shook her head. No, that's not right. Yes, I am married to Brad, but he is not and has never been a parent to my children. He was often away, drinking or with someone else. She winced and glanced at me briefly. The only time he was home was on Sunday mornings when he would tell the kids to get out so he could watch sports. He called them names, so I don't see him as a parent. For the first time in years, I felt compassion for Georgia. I was still processing the fact that her son wasn't my brother. If I had known, I thought she would defend Brad in court today. But clearly some of what I had heard about how my family treated Georgia was true. It couldn't have been easy for her dealing with me, her sisters, little contact with her mother, no word from her birth father, and what seemed like mistreatment from my family. The lawyer looked confused. He clearly didn't expect such a tough witness. Eventually, he said, "Your witness," to the prosecution as he sat down, looking defeated. The prosecution was smiling confidently. "Mrs. Uther, how is your relationship with your husband?" he asked, capturing everyone's attention. "We're going through a divorce," Georgia replied, sounding defeated. I leaned back in surprise. I should have guessed, but hearing it from Georgia felt different. "Can you explain why you're getting a divorce?" the prosecution asked. "Objection! The witness's marital status and reasons for divorce aren't relevant to this case," the defense weakly argued. It seemed like he wanted to know just as much as everyone else. "Actually," the prosecution countered, "one reason we are here today is that Mrs. Uther is divorcing the defendant for violating her privacy, one of the charges against him." They both looked to the judge. "Overruled. The witness will answer the question." Georgia again glanced at me. I met her gaze. I felt Amy hold my hand and give it a reassuring squeeze. Georgia looked at my father, Brad, then turned to the prosecutor. She sighed. "I have many reasons for divorcing my husband, but the most important one is that I never loved him." A quiet gasp filled the room. "When I became pregnant with the son everyone thought was Brad's, I was married to another man. I was having an affair with Brad, and when that other man left me, I married Brad with encouragement from his family." "And who was the other man?" the prosecutor asked. I felt Amy squeeze my hand again, and Georgia looked my way. "It was Brad's younger brother, Robbie Uther," she said, her voice filled with regret. "So you had an affair with your husband's brother. Your son is actually the child of your ex-husband, who found out, divorced you, and now you are married to Brad." Georgia looked at me with longing and sadness. It was a different kind of sadness than I had seen in her before. There was a pain there that I didn't fully understand yet, but I was about to. "No, neither brother is the father of my son," she replied, directing her gaze back to the prosecutor. For a moment, no one spoke. The room was silent, in shock. I glanced at my brother, whose neck was tense. This was new information for him. He genuinely believed that Brad Jr. was his biological son. I looked at my father, and in a room full of people, he was smiling, calm, almost peaceful. Unbelievable. The defense lawyer found his voice. "So who is your son's father if it is neither your ex-husband nor his younger brother whom you married after he found out?" I turned back to Georgia. I looked at Brad. I looked at my father as Georgia prepared to speak, and the whole courtroom held its breath. "Their father," Georgia whispered. As soon as she spoke those words, chaos broke out. Everyone jumped to their feet shouting. I was surprised to find myself among them, yelling at my father, but my voice was drowned out by the noise. Georgia just sat there. After about 15 minutes and a few security guards, calm was finally restored in the courtroom. I shot a glare at my father. I had thought my feelings for him couldn't get worse, but once again, I was wrong. No words could capture the intensity of the anger I felt. During the earlier chaos, he had glanced at me, smiled, and even winked. I couldn't believe it. It took every ounce of my strength, and with Amy physically blocking me, to stop myself from confronting him. So, the prosecution lawyer said, trying to regain control. Let's clarify this. You were married to Mr. Robert Other, the youngest son of Mr. Brad Other. But at the same time, you were involved with Robert's older brother, Brad Other, JNR? Yes, Georgia replied. You got pregnant, and at first you let everyone think the baby was Robert's. But when people found out, you changed your story to say the child was Brad's. Now you claim the child is neither of theirs? He asked, surprised. There was a tense silence, but everyone maintained their composure. Yes, Georgia confirmed again. He shook his head. I'm sorry, but how did this happen? Once again, the room fell quiet as everyone focused on Georgia. It only happened twice, she said, looking at me. Robbie was away, and both Brad and his father had me drinking. I don't remember much, but the DNA test during my divorce with Robbie revealed the truth. I never told anyone until now. I see, he said, trying to process the information. We watched as he extracted more details from Georgia about the situation. She looked embarrassed, but was trying to stay calm. My father appeared ready to boast, while my brother looked confused. Then Georgia shared how my father, brother, and sister got her into a lifestyle she had not planned, resulting in her having a second child, this time with my sister's fiancé. No one spoke. The truth about the parentage of Georgia's children was a burden she would carry forever, and it was now out in the open. The judge brought us back to the main topic, taking a few moments to steer the conversation. How would you describe your relationship with your ex-husband, your current husband's younger brother? The prosecution lawyer asked. There is no relationship, she answered plainly. Can you explain why? When the defense lawyer started to object, the prosecution addressed the judge. This is important for understanding the situation, Your Honor. Proceed, the judge said. Georgia paused for a moment and then spoke. Ever since Robbie found me with his brother and learned how we all let him down, Robbie has cut ties with us. He moved away and is now married with kids. As far as I know, Robbie has always said he doesn't want to reconcile after everything that happened. Honestly, I can't blame him. The prosecution nodded in agreement. So you betrayed him and his family, including his brother and father, let him down too. You married his brother, but things didn't work out well. That is correct, Georgia admitted. What was your husband's attitude toward his brother? The lawyer asked. Brad and his father were openly unkind to Robbie, Georgia responded. They would insult him whenever they could, and Brad often talked about how he could ruin Robbie's life. Brad and his father blamed Robbie for everything that went wrong after Robbie left. Can you explain how the defendant could invade someone's privacy in such a clear way? Asked the prosecutor, trying to keep the focus on the case. Georgia looked at me, then at Amy, and finally at Brad, who was glaring at her. I once heard Brad's father yell at Robbie during an argument, saying he was a mistake and only useful for their business. He even said I should be thankful that Brad was involved with me, she said. Georgia turned red as she shared this. Brad's dad told me it was okay to be with Robbie's brother, suggesting that any children I might have with Robbie would be weak. Once, they got me drunk, and I think that's when I got pregnant with Brad's child. I felt a chill at her words. Not only had Georgia been unfaithful, but it seemed that my father was involved too. It felt like Georgia was being used against me rather than being a willing partner. Shaking off the dark thoughts, I listened as my ex-wife continued. During the divorce, when things were really bad, Brad pressured me into being intimate with him. He also insulted Robbie, saying he wanted to find him and hurt him so he could never have kids. He talked about tying him up and getting revenge. What was he seeking revenge for? Georgia was asked. I felt a lump in my throat. This was one of my mistakes. Not long before the divorce was final, we ran into Robbie on the street, and Robbie ended up in the hospital. She explained how I had acted on my promise to confront Brad for the hurt he caused me. She said she didn't blame me for that. No charges were pressed. Still, Brad held on to his anger and wanted payback. The questioning went on for another half hour, making Brad look like someone who was always trying to bully his younger brother. My father was also mentioned negatively several times. Then they moved on to the pictures. Mrs. Other, does your phone have a password? Yes. Does your husband know the password? No. Do you have private photos on your phone from your time married to Mr. Robert Other? I did have. Can you explain? Georgia took a deep breath. When Robbie and I were together, we took several private photos and videos. They were meant just for us. Did you ever show these photos or videos to the defendant? No. Can you tell us why? She looked back at me, a little embarrassed. As I said before, I have never loved Brad, and I do not like his father at all. When Robbie left me, his family encouraged me to marry Brad since we had been pretending to be a family. After we got married, it was clear that Brad began to distance himself. Our connection became routine, and we were together only once a month. Brad spent a lot of time away from home. I felt very lonely, and often looked at old photos and videos to feel something during my lonely nights. I felt embarrassed. So, Mrs. Other, do you think it's wrong to keep personal images of a man you are no longer with while being married to his brother? Georgia did not blush this time. No, Robbie and I took those together. I would never share them or hurt a man I still cared for. Those pictures reminded me of what I lost. They were my comfort, in a time when I felt unloved. The prosecutor looked at Georgia with concern. If you didn't give the images to the defendant, how did he get them to send to his brother? Georgia became upset and needed a few minutes and some tissues before she could reply. One night, Brad went out with his father. I think they were going to a group event. I had put the kids to bed and felt lonely. I looked at some old pictures and videos to feel better when Brad suddenly came into the room. He saw me and then noticed the images on my phone. Brad and I never took personal pictures, and he knew I didn't like that kind of content. When he saw the screen, he realized it was Robbie and me. Georgia looked down and rubbed her arm, remembering. Brad grabbed my phone, trying to take it from me. He wasn't as strong as Robbie, but he was still strong. He managed to copy everything to his phone. I was telling him to stop, but he threw me against the wall, called me names, and left with my phone. I felt shocked and cried. When I came out later, my phone was broken and Brad was gone. The courtroom fell silent for a few moments until the prosecutor spoke up. Thank you, Mrs. Other. I understand that sharing this has been difficult for you as well as everything else you're sharing today. I apologize for any discomfort this may have caused you or Mr. Robert Other. As Georgia left the witness stand, Brad glared at her. My father's expression wasn't any better. Georgia did not look towards me again for the rest of the hearing. The prosecutor stood before the court. He caught my gaze and offered a small, sympathetic nod. Aside from the troubling behavior we've just heard about, we have heard important testimony from the defendant's wife. He was a harsh and dishonest person who often dreamed of getting back at others, especially his younger brother. Over the years, He tried several times to harm their relationship. He even managed to send private images that were not his to his brother's wife, hoping to hurt his brother. Evidence showed that he used his work computer to send an email that contained these attachments. After some time, he asked to call my brother, Mr. Brad Other Jr., who was the one being accused. My brother took a seat, his eyes wide and unfocused. It looked like he was struggling to stay calm. Mr. Other, you have heard the claims made against you today. You know you broke your wife's trust and invaded your younger brother's privacy. Do you deny this? Brad looked at me and gave a crooked smile. Nope. I won't deny it, he answered proudly, smirking at me. Everyone was surprised. No one expected such a clear admission right away. Mr. Other, how would you explain your actions then? The prosecutor asked, trying to find his footing after such an open statement of guilt from the defendant. My brother glared at me again, but still wore that smile. My younger brother was a mistake our family should not have made. People say he is talented at everything he tries. At school, he was always the best. He moved through university easily and learned martial arts like it was second nature. He felt like a mistake in our family because no one could match his skills. I talked about this with Dad when I was a teenager, and we figured out his weakness. Robbie was always honest. He put all his effort into everything and would defend any of us without question. My brother started laughing at the memories. When we were kids, I would ask Robbie to do my homework while pretending to protect him from the bullies I had sent after him. That worked until he began martial arts. If his bike had a flat tire, it was usually my fault. If something was broken in his room, I had likely been there before. At home, Dad and I made sure that Mom always served him last, since he was the youngest, while we ate well. When he joined the family business, Dad had him manage things, and he quickly proved to be very good at it. My younger brother excelled in sales, operations, and manufacturing, which frustrated us all. But it also eased the pressure on the rest of the family, allowing us to relax a bit. We used to say, "You knew it would be done if Robbie was in charge." My brother looked so disgusted that I could imagine him spitting on the courtroom floor as he admitted this. When Dad paired Georgia and Robbie together, it made sure Robbie stayed put and kept everything running smoothly. We left them alone for a year. Then, a few months after they married, Dad asked me to charm Georgia so we could have another way to manage Robbie if we needed to. Brad glanced at Georgia, who seemed to be looking at him. He smiled that big, crooked smile again. He also looked over at Dad, who had an odd grin on his face, even after everything that had just come out in court. I couldn't understand why he seemed pleased with my brother spilling these secrets. It was easy to be with my brother's wife. Dad sent him away for work, trusting that his family would look after Georgia. A few glasses of wine and my role as a concerned brother later, I found myself in his bed the next day. For 3 years, I was with her whenever Robbie was gone, sometimes even when he was at work. Sure, my sister caught us early on, but Dad and I made sure that our mom and sister stayed quiet. They knew that if they spoke up, their comfortable life would disappear. I sat there, angry at my brother for what he was saying. He had always tried to bring me down just because I was more capable than he was. His laughter filled the room, but there was something off about it, not the laugh of a healthy person. I didn't realize that Dad was the one who got Georgia in trouble. She was so out of it during those times we were together. I don't think she even knew what was happening. He trailed off for a moment. No one spoke. We just listened. Suddenly he was back, grinning at me like nothing mattered. But hey, it didn't happen to the golden boy, so who cares? Brad chuckled. We all agreed she had to say it was my little brother's child. I was thrilled. Robbie thought he was going to be a dad. But then his smile faded. He came home early from that trip and ruined everything. He found me with Georgia, and things got rough. Physical threats didn't work because he was a strong fighter, and I wasn't. Even Mom and Dad couldn't get him to see it my way. He walked out on us and everything fell apart. After that, we all had to work hard, but no one could do it like Robbie. Then, after the baby arrived, he came back and sent me to the hospital. I wanted to take action against him, but Dad still wanted Robbie on the team and convinced me to let it go. Then I saw him clash with that guy, and I tried to distract him by acting confident while being close to Georgia, the woman I had taken from him. He ended up overpowering the guy. After that, he disappeared from my life and showed up nearly a year later married. We tried many things to get back at him, like suing him, but his lawyers were better. I thought about hiring a private investigator to follow him, but nothing came of it. It wasn't until we found him at Alro Homes that I knew I would have to wait for the right moment. But it was tough to find a way in. I wanted to ruin his marriage and make my dad's threat of seeing him without a home come true. But then he started taking our business, and there was that fight where Mom showed up. Suddenly he was the hero, and we were the family that had pushed him away. It felt like he was living a fairy tale. It was clear he was losing control. My brother was making foolish admissions and doing it with a smile. I shook my head, and he noticed, his eyes lighting up as if he thought he had gotten to me. Robbie hit us hard again when Mom passed away. None of us could attend the service. The media chased us non-stop. I don't know what happened to my sister, but she fought with Dad, and no one has seen her since. I wouldn't be surprised if Robbie had something to do with it. Joanna always followed the rules, even allowing her fiancé to betray me. Several people in the room whispered to each other, while the defense lawyer just stared, unsure of how to respond. My brother continued. Before Mom died, I found Georgia looking at old photos of her and Robbie. I took her phone, copied the photos, and sent them to Amy using an old email address from Georgia's contacts. I hoped that seeing those pictures would make Amy leave him. I figured if I could hurt him through one sister, it would be easy to do the same with another. His smile faded and he got serious. I didn't think they would know I was the one sending the photos. But now I'm in too deep anyway, so I might as well make the most of it and get some attention. Maybe I could even write a book one day. Then he fell silent, crossing his arms as if he had wrapped up his tale. No one knew how to react. My brother had not only confessed to wrongdoing, but had also dragged our father into issues that, while perhaps not illegal, showed a pattern of hurtful behavior towards me, Georgia, and even Mom and Joanna. Still, he seemed proud, not sorry at all. If we looked deeper into his thoughts, it seemed learning about his father's betrayal pushed him over the edge. Many in the room recognized me from the news and stole glances my way. Even the judge took a moment to look at me. I looked at my older brother with anger and tried not to look at my father. The lawyer for the prosecution cleared his throat and glanced at Brad's lawyer. "Your witness," he said, and then sat down. The defense lawyer said, "No further questions," sounding defeated. In the end, Brad was found guilty of invading privacy and was also charged with domestic abuse. The judge decided to end the marriage between Brad and Georgia right away. The paperwork would be taken care of quickly, and Georgia would be free. Brad was sentenced to 5 years in a medium security prison. As we left the courtroom, I looked for Georgia. For the first time, I really wanted to find her. Amy and I found her in the parking lot. "Georgia! Wait!" I shouted as we hurried to catch up with her. I saw Georgia take a deep breath and turn to us, her shoulders shrugging. "Robbie, please don't," my ex-wife said tiredly. Today was hard enough without you reminding me of my mistakes. I'm done. The only reason I'm still here is my children. Your mother was my only friend, and now she's gone. I did something she didn't expect. I let go of Amy's hand and walked toward Georgia, pulling her into a hug. For a moment she was stiff, but then I felt her relax into me. She began to cry heavily. Right there in the parking lot, she sobbed as I held her. I looked at Amy, and she was tearing up too. I wasn't ready to forgive Georgia, but I knew I could show her kindness at that moment. I might not like my ex-wife, but I didn't want her to be in pain. After a few minutes, she pulled back and wiped her eyes. "Thank you, Robbie. And thank you, Amy. That was more than I deserve," Georgia said quietly. I smiled sadly and said, "I know, Georgia, but I do have a heart. What you did today was the bravest thing I've ever seen from you. I know how hard it must have been to say what you did." Amy took my hand again, but leaned toward Georgia, offering her a supportive touch, an act of kindness between the two women after so many years. "We never had a chance, did we, Robbie?" Georgia asked a moment later, sadness clear on her face. I shook my head. "Of course we did, Georgia. We had every chance. It didn't matter that my family tried to hurt us. I don't care that Dad wanted control by bringing us together. It was your choice that caused our problems. You decided to betray my trust, and that hurt us both. If you had come to me and shared your worries, there might have been a chance for us. But you chose to hide the truth and make choices that broke us. That wasn't just about my family. Yes, they might have influenced you, but it was your choice. You had many chances to speak up when we were alone together. It took me finding you with Brad, for you to realize I wouldn't accept that behavior from anyone." She nodded, trying to hold back her tears. Amy looked at her with sympathy but didn't move closer to comfort her sister beyond a gentle touch on her arm. "Where are you and the kids staying?" Amy asked softly. "We're staying with Ruth and her family for now," Georgia said. "Since Hattie passed away, I've felt lost. Ruth took us in, though she's not exactly happy about it, and she's trying her best to care for us." We nodded in understanding. Georgia sighed, then turned her gaze to me. "Did you read the letter?" she asked. I had forgotten about the letter Georgia gave me in the hospital while Mum was unwell. She wanted me to read it when things calmed down. I shook my head. In return, she offered a small, sad smile. "Could you read it soon? It's just an apology for everything. I know it doesn't change anything, but my therapist encouraged me to write it and, if possible, one day give it to you." "Okay, Georgia. I will read it," I promised her. Georgia seemed uncertain, but then looked up at Amy. "Please take care of him. If there's anything good that came from all this, it's that you found Robbie and make him happier than I ever could." With that, Georgia got into her old car and drove away. "I feel a bit sorry for her," Amy said as she leaned against me while watching her leave the parking lot. "Yeah," I answered. "What? You feel sorry for her?" my wife asked, looking at me in surprise. I shrugged. "A little, but I meant what I said. She could have talked to me instead of hiding things. I don't think I can ever really forgive her." We talked more about forgiveness and the day's events as we drove home. When we got to bed, we held each other and soon fell asleep. The next morning, I got coffee for Amy and myself before anyone else was up. At the coffee shop, I saw the news coverage about the trial, including details about what my father and brother had done. A reporter was waiting outside for me, but the local people blocked his way so I could leave without being noticed. When I got back, William was watching Bluey, and Amy was on the balcony with Sarah. She smiled as I set her coffee down, placing Georgia's letter on the table in front of me. "Are you going to read it?" she asked. "Yep." I told her I would. I replied with a tight smile. As we each relaxed in our spots, I opened the letter and began to read. My dearest Robbie, I know I don't deserve to call you that anymore. But despite everything that has happened between us, that is how I still see you, my dearest. The last few years, since you learned about Brad and me, along with other things I hope you never find out, have been the hardest of my life. To be honest, things started to go downhill the night I first spent time with Brad. I want you to know that I admired you from the moment we met. You were strong, good-looking, smart, and always knew how to tackle a challenge except for the betrayal that your family and I caused. I will always regret what we did to you. We hurt you, and I hurt you the most. I was meant to be your wife, your best friend, and your trusted supporter. Instead, I let you down. Looking back, and with the help of therapy, I see that while I feel terrible about my actions, you likely suffered more. You might already know that your brother has been unfaithful to me for years, but I know what I did to you was worse. Robbie, this letter is my way of saying I'm sorry. I genuinely feel sad for losing my best friend. I regret that I betrayed you with lies and deceit, and that I went along with your family instead of being honest with you. Even if you still would have decided to end things, I believe my heart wouldn't feel as heavy as it does now. I'm writing this after hearing that Hattie is very sick, and I plan to give this to you the next time I see you. You should know that your mother loved you deeply, and we often talked about the things that happened. From what I've seen in the news about your father and what he did to your mother, I hope you have found some peace. There's a saying about betrayal that your parents once told me. When someone betrays you, it can feel like wanting to strike back. I remember you feeling so angry at your family and at me. Well, we thought we hurt you, but in truth, we ended up hurting ourselves more. With your mother gone, Joanna is leaving, and your father seems very upset. I know your brother will follow his lead. I won't be part of that anymore. I am leaving Brad and ending my marriage. Honestly, I never loved him. He was just around when you were gone, and being with him felt like my punishment. But I can no longer endure the dishonesty and his treatment of the children. Ruth has welcomed us to stay with her and her family for a while until I figure things out. What comforts me, even a little, is knowing you have found love with Amy, while I have struggled. She seems to be everything I am not: dedicated, hardworking, loving, and loyal. From what my mother told me, you and Amy have a child, and another is on the way. I wish you both much happiness. Treasure your family and avoid making the mistakes I made. I understand that you may dislike me, and you have every right to feel that way. I dislike myself, and I know that we can't go back to how things were, but if you could ever forgive me, I would be very thankful. Maybe it would help you as much as it helps me. Live your life, Robbie. Always love, Georgia. I read the letter again and set it down on the table. Amy looked at me thoughtfully while Sarah was being fed on the other side. So? She asked. I gazed out at the Pacific Ocean. It was definitely an apology. She explained a few things that we heard in court yesterday, but you can really feel her regret in her words. Can I read it? Amy asked. I handed her the letter, and she read it. When she finished, she passed my daughter back to me while I burped her, and Amy read the letter again. You're right. It's a good apology. But you don't seem too upset about it, do you? No. I've felt a lot over the situation already. I feel sad for her. Georgia was mistreated by her family, but after all this time, I'm not really emotional about it, I told Amy. Amy nodded, folded the letter, and placed it back in the envelope. We both stood up and went inside. I grabbed my phone from the bench and texted Ruth. "Hi, Ruth. Please let Georgia know I read her letter. Thank her for the apology and tell her I hope she finds peace." I pressed send and showed the message to Amy, who nodded. "That's not quite forgiveness," Amy said. "No, but I don't wish her harm anymore." "I see that as progress," I replied. The morning news featured parts of the trial. There were photos of Brad, Georgia, Amy, and me. Next week's articles, titled "Brother Gets What He Deserves" and "Family Troubles Explode," would be online. Most of the coverage was in my favor, saying how poorly they had treated me and that they deserved what happened to them. My father received even worse reviews than my brother. After what was revealed yesterday, that wasn't surprising. A few weeks later, Toni had her first child, a daughter named Carla. She had her mother's eyes and her father's smile, and she loved being held by everyone. If she wasn't sleeping, she was crying, unless someone was holding her. The only time she was calm was when we placed Carla and Sarah together. This formed a bond that would last a lifetime. The girls were as close as sisters and got each other out of trouble as often as they found trouble together. Darren and Toni spent a lot of time with us as they had a big place. Darren talked to me about retiring from fighting. I agreed, but mentioned that I wanted one last fight to see if I could stay the champion. He said he would look into it. 3 days later, I received an offer. A Russian MMA fighter named Stephen the Magnificent wanted to come to Brisbane to fight me after watching my previous matches. We set the date for the match in 6 months, and everyone started training hard. The news spread that this would be my last professional fight, as I wanted to focus more on my family and business instead of fighting. Darren pushed me to train harder than ever. When I wasn't at my job at Alro Homes or with my family, I was training. My diet was strict and I only took Sunday mornings off. I was often so tired that I had to find the energy to be with Amy. Luckily, my wife had a way of cheering me up even when I was exhausted from training. By the end of it, spending time with her was my only break from the tough routine. With 3 weeks left, I could see the progress. I was in the best shape of my life, faster, stronger, and more agile than before. Darren kept me motivated, and as the fight day approached, I was excited to face Stephen the Magnificent. We watched his past matches, and he was a strong fighter as well, relying on speed from years of training in Muay Thai. We would be a good match. Tickets had sold out weeks before, and just a week before the fight, the odds were now in my favor for the first time, 3-1. On the night of the fight, Stephen and I shared some playful teasing, but he was the most polite opponent I had faced. He wished me luck and hoped for an exciting match. The first round was straightforward, where we tested each other's defenses and threw a few punches to get a read on one another. The second round turned in his favor. He attacked with quick combinations and speed, landing several hits that would leave me sore. Round 3 went better for me. I broke through his defense and landed some strong kicks that sent him to the mat. When that round ended, we both realized it would be a close competition. I managed to break his defense again in round 4, but he countered with leg sweeps that kept me alert. The cameras were everywhere. The crowd cheered after every punch and kick, creating an electric atmosphere. We stayed focused in the 5th round, and we both started landing good hits right away. The energy was high, the crowd was loud, and we were both covered in sweat. It was a thrilling matchup of strength and strategy. Just as we were trading blows, something unexpected happened. A person suddenly entered the ring. While the crowd and cameras were focused on Stephen and me, the referee was watching too. Before anyone could react, a figure climbed into the ring and took a defensive stance. This person clearly wasn't a fighter. Their clothes looked worn out, and their gray hair showed they were much older than us. No, there was no danger from the man who stepped into the ring as a fighter. However, the gun he held posed a real threat and was aimed right at me. It was my father. Stephen and I had moved apart, looking at Brad Others Sr. as he stood there with the gun pointed at me. My father shouted at the referee and my opponent, "Get out!" Stephen glanced at me for a moment. I shook my head, and he nodded as he helped the referee leave the ring. The crowd fell silent. "So," my father growled, "you think you can leave your family just because you're a big-time fighter now?" There were thousands of people in the arena, and even though security was present, they were spread out. Most people would not want to enter the ring during an ongoing fight, so it seemed my father had found a chance. I turned and walked slowly, keeping my back to the entrance. I wanted to keep things safe and reduce the chance of anyone getting hurt if my father lost control. I had no way to defend myself, just some fitted pants and wrapped hands. Without the gun, I could easily take him down. But a gun was something I couldn't protect against. I looked at my father. His angry face made me feel that I might not leave the ring. Still, a sense of calm washed over me. "Dad," I said quietly, letting go of my past anger for a moment. The pain of being rejected by my family faded away. I spoke softly like a young child addressing his father with curiosity. My father looked around, noticing the TV cameras, then turned his gaze back to me with narrowed eyes. "Dad," I said again in the same gentle tone, holding my arms out wide but careful not to move closer to the man with the gun. "Are you all right, Dad?" I asked calmly. He let out a harsh laugh, his grip on the gun steady. "That's your question? You want to know if I'm all right? As I stand here threatening your life, and you're asking if I'm okay. Really, Robert, you can do better." I shrugged, trying to remain calm while adrenaline flowed through me. I could see security trying to push the crowd back, and surprisingly, no one was screaming. Everyone was focused on our conversation, knowing panic would likely come later. I had no idea where Amy was, but I hoped she was safe. "I guess there's not much to say after everything, is there?" I replied to my father's question. His expression changed for a moment. "No, not really." He looked at me, the pain on his face fading into a look of sadness. His voice softened. "You know, I really wanted you to overcome your brother in Georgia all those years ago. I wanted you to stay in the family. We needed you, son." I was taken aback by him calling me his son. Since that night, the only name he called me was Robert. I had no idea what was going on outside the ring. The lights were too bright, and my focus stayed on my father. I turned a little to my left, letting Dad think I was lost in thought. When I looked back at him a moment later, I had noticed Darren, Tony, and the worried face of my wife behind a line of security guards. I had also shifted my stance slightly. Honestly, I tried to sound calm. If we set aside the feelings and arguments, Dad, don't you see how I might react? Staying calm was tough. I wanted to shout at him for his betrayal. He had hurt both my brother and me. And I had a younger half-brother, too. I wanted to tell him how I felt about what he did. I wanted to let him know how he broke our family. Sure, I had walked away years ago, but his choices had torn us apart. For a moment, Dad just stared at me, saying nothing. He quickly looked at the crowd and then back at me. "You know, Robbie," he paused and raised the gun. His face twisted with anger again. "But you betrayed the family. You betrayed me. I said I would ruin you. And if I can't make you suffer, then I'll have to settle for finishing this." I heard a scream from the crowd, Amy's voice shouting, "No!" It caught Dad's attention for a moment. Without thinking, and with years of training kicking in, I charged at my father when the first shot went off. Pain shot through my shoulder as I ran. The first shot aimed for my head but missed. I quickly dodged to the side as another shot was fired. This one hit my collarbone. One more second passed, and I leaped. A third shot rang out, hitting me in the stomach, but I didn't care. My leg was already extended, determined to reach my target. Just then, a fourth shot grazed my left arm, which I used to balance myself. I hit Brad Sr. with my signature kick, just like I had done before. My foot struck his head, and before anyone could react, the anger on his face turned to shock as he felt the impact. His body went into a slow fall as he lost control, the gun slipping from his hands. As he stumbled against the side of the ring, the weapon fell to the floor, and I used the momentum from my kick to land on my feet. The whole stadium was quiet except for the sounds of the fallen object. Without thinking, I jumped up, glanced at the weapon, and then looked at my father, whose eyes were wide and confused. The threat was over. Then I fell to my knees and started feeling very sick as the crowd erupted into chaos. In moments, security rushed into the ring, moving the weapon away from my father. They turned him onto his stomach, holding his arms behind his back. Just a moment later, Amy was beside me, very upset. She was crying, trying to comfort me, while Tony tried to help her stay calm, and Darren worked to ease me onto my back, putting pressure on my injuries. I was surprised that my shoulder and collarbone hurt the most. My arm stung, but the injury in my stomach, though it was bleeding more, hurt the least. "Try to relax, Robbie. The ambulance will be here soon," Darren said in a calm voice, even though his eyes showed concern as he looked for help. Amy was leaning over me again, kissing my forehead while scolding me. "You brave, silly man." "What were you thinking?" she cried. I tried to shrug, but it hurt. "He wouldn't stop," I said softly as my wife wiped a bit of blood from the side of my mouth with her shirt. "I just needed to make sure you were safe." Amy kissed me again. "You didn't think you'd make it out alive, did you? You were going to put yourself in danger, weren't you?" "Yeah," I admitted. I was starting to feel tired now. I could sense movement as police and paramedics entered the ring. "I'm sorry, Amy. But as long as you were safe and I could stop him, I thought it was worth it," I told her. Through her tears, I saw a bittersweet smile, and she nodded. "You're an incredible man," Amy replied, tears falling onto my shirt. Amy, Darren, and Tony continued to talk to me as the ambulance team set up a stretcher and began checking my injuries, working alongside the stadium medical staff to prepare me for transport. After loading me onto the stretcher, Stephen the Magnificent approached and placed a hand on my uninjured shoulder. In his thick Russian accent, he told me he was withdrawing from the match because he had never seen such bravery. I managed to stay aware in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, with Amy holding my hand the entire ride. When we arrived, the hospital was ready for me, and I was quickly taken in for surgery. Amy gave me a final kiss, concern on her face. I smiled and told her I would see her soon. 2 days later, I woke up feeling sore and stiff. The surgery had gone well, and they had removed all 3 bullets. Luckily, the injury wasn't as severe as it could have been. The bullet that hit my stomach didn't do much damage because it was a small caliber gun. It had been stuck in my intestine, but the doctors fixed it. My shoulder was going to take longer to heal since the bullet had broken my collarbone. My arm, where I had the 4th bullet, was bandaged and itchy. Overall, I felt fortunate to be alive. Amy was there when I opened my eyes, and our reunion was emotional. I felt overwhelmed by her kisses and tears. She smiled at me playfully, but when I joked about it, she gently slapped me, which made me wince and upset her again. While the doctors examined me, Amy called Tony to let her know I was awake. Darren and Tony were taking care of the kids, and with the doctor's permission, they would all visit me the next morning. I woke up around lunchtime, so the rest of the afternoon was filled with tests and catching up on what had happened after my last fight. Since the entire event was shown live on sports TV, reporters and TV shows were going wild with the story. I had somehow become a symbol of hope for people struggling with family issues around the world. In 3 different countries, news shows were telling stories about me and my family's struggles, and there was a swarm of reporters outside the hospital waiting for updates. To keep our family safe, Amy hired private security through Alro. Since I was already somewhat known due to my previous fights, everyone was eager to learn more about me. My father was taken away in handcuffs right after they wheeled me out on a stretcher. He was charged with a serious crime, and George, who had seen the fight, had already begun legal action. My father was now in isolation because another prisoner had confronted him about hurting me. Another challenge we faced was that Amy's privacy as the CEO of Alro was gone. She wasn't hiding, being married to someone so well known, but it didn't take long for the media to piece everything together. Amy asked her marketing team to share our story, including the founding of Alro and Alro Homes, and to request privacy while I recovered from my injuries. When other sports stars around the world supported her request, many reporters took a step back and waited for news. I spent 9 days in the hospital. I could have gone home to rest after 5 days. The doctors wanted to make sure I didn't hurt my stitches or get bothered by the media. When I arrived home, I had strict rules to follow. I needed to move as little as possible and rest in bed. After 2 days, I felt restless from not being able to get up. Amy only let me out of bed for the bathroom or shower. Luckily, she helped me with the shower, so it wasn't all bad. Plus, I enjoyed the beautiful view of the ocean from our home. It felt strange being in the spotlight. I was used to being talked about as a fighter, but the attention I got after going through tough times and dealing with my father was a kind of fame I wanted to disappear quickly. After a week, I started to feel better. My doctor said I could move around again, and my stomach wound was healing nicely. My arm was sore but getting better, and although my shoulder and collarbone still hurt, they were also improving. The doctors had me wear a sling. Amy and I received many requests from media all over the world. Popular shows in the U.S. wanted to interview us. Bloggers were writing about us. And even 3 movie studios reached out about making something based on my life. It all felt quite overwhelming. My life had changed a lot since I came home early that Friday evening. As I sat alone on our balcony, sipping my drink, I thought back to that night. I was looking out at the ocean and noticed a storm approaching over the mountains to the left. The dark clouds were heavy with rain, and I could see flashes of lightning in the distance as the sun quickly set. The storm would reach us in about half an hour, but for now, I was enjoying the beauty of it. Suddenly, I felt Amy's hand slip into mine as she joined me with her drink. "You okay there?" she asked. "Yeah, just thinking," I replied. She nodded, understanding my mood. "We've been through a lot, haven't we?" she said, sensing my thoughts. "It was a Friday night, similar to this one, when everything changed," I shared with her. "I don't know if I ever mentioned this, but on that night, I experienced a storm on my flight home like the one approaching now. As I walked away from my parents after the storm passed over the Gold Coast, I thought my life was over when the rain began to pour." Amy nodded again and took a sip of her drink. "I mean," I continued, watching the clouds roll in over the mountains. "The people I trusted most in the world had just told me to move on from my wife's betrayal. They didn't seem to care about how much it hurt." "What about now?" Amy asked, taking a sip of her drink. I smiled and pointed toward the approaching storm, where lightning flashed and rain began to fall in the distance. "I see things differently now. That night, as the rain fell, it felt like the beginning of something new, like it was washing away the sadness in my life. If I had followed what my family wanted, I wouldn't have the love and happiness I have now. Yes, I lost my parents, siblings, and my first marriage that night. But from that loss, I gained something better. I met you. Amy smiled at me. Since then, I've traveled, we have 2 wonderful kids, and I've even taken on challenges I'd never imagined. There has been pain, I said, rolling my shoulder with a slight wince from an old injury. But Amy, my love, I wouldn't trade any of it if it meant not having you or the kids. We talked about the past for the next hour, watching the storm come closer. As the rain finally broke over the house, William joined us, sitting on Amy's lap, and our friends, Tony and Darren, brought their children out too. We all ended up laughing and soaked from the rain before finally heading inside. After warming up with showers and hot chocolate, we got the kids settled in bed and turned in for the night ourselves. In bed, Amy and I cuddled, listening to the storm and watching the flashes of lightning through our window. The kindness in our relationship made me love this woman who chose to be with a man bringing extra baggage. I love you, Robbie, she whispered as we drifted off to sleep later. The next year was full of change. Amy and I hired a publicist and an agent to help us with the media. We became favorites in the press, needing to step back from our high positions in Alro and Alro Homes. We made good hires and kept our seats on both company boards. Just being associated with us helped both companies succeed. We also had a security team with us now. Almost everywhere we went, people recognized us. For about 6 months after I left the hospital, paparazzi were everywhere, and our pictures often appeared in gossip magazines and online blogs. We quickly learned to be aware of our surroundings. The biggest challenge was that we often received unwanted attention. Sometimes women would approach me with flirtations right in front of Amy. The first few times, Amy got very upset, wanting to lash out at them. But our security team helped, and over time, we learned how to kindly move those people away and thank them while turning down their advances. An incident Amy had in New Zealand years ago taught us this lesson. One day, I was surprised to get a letter from Joanna out of nowhere. I had to admit I felt a bit uneasy about reaching out to my sister. I had said I forgave her, but forgiving what happened and wanting to see her were 2 different matters. In the letter, she shared her regrets and sadness about what happened to our family. She told me she was finding her way in Melbourne and apologized again for her part in everything. She also mentioned that if I ever needed her as a witness at the trial against Dad, she would support me. Speaking of my father, he received a 25-year sentence in a medium security prison. It was even the same prison where Brad Jr. was held. I think you can gather that I have never visited either of them. William and Sarah were growing quickly, and I felt joy as they changed from infants to toddlers while always being with us. Following our publicist's suggestion, we went on a world tour. We appeared on some big talk shows, discussing our story without harshly criticizing my family. We talked about my fighting career and how we both coped after the shooting. We also made a deal with one of the studios to create a mini-series about our lives. It was called The Nuclear Family. When it came out, it became one of the highest-grossing dramas of the year. Everyone found themselves drawn to a man who stood by his values and discovered true love. It helped that we never acted like we were famous, but it was nice to be called friends by some well-known actors and celebrities from around the world. As we traveled, Amy kept working with Alro clients and investments. She focused more on speaking for the company and showing what we stood for. With a strong executive team and good media support, Alro continued to grow. Alro Homes also expanded. Within 2 years of the incident at the fight, we had new branches along the east coast of Australia and opened an office in New Zealand. I held back from rushing into Asia, knowing we could use our popularity to enter that market. Our management team had mentioned it a few times, but Amy and I felt it would be too ambitious. We were doing good work in Australia and making enough money, so we decided to stay local. Darren and Tony remain the best couple Amy and I know. They are our close friends. And soon after the incident, Darren opened a mixed martial arts dojo that quickly filled up once the news got out. It has been 3 years since that life-changing event. Amy and I still get approached when we're out, though the excitement of being famous has faded. We usually have 2 security friends with us whenever we are in public. They are both amateur fighters who train with Darren and me, so it feels good to be protected by friends. They are always alert and happy to be with us. On a beautiful spring afternoon, Amy and I were sitting at a charming cafe by the bay outside Brisbane with Peter and Rain. The kids were coloring, making a mess of their lunches, and enjoying milkshakes. I was enjoying the cafe's Bayside Burger double meat, double cheese, lettuce, tomatoes, grilled onions, mustard, and chili jam. It was an amazing burger. I was also finishing off a delicious chocolate shake. You know, the kind that takes a little effort to sip, but instantly melts in your mouth. Amy was next to me, relaxed and smiling as she finished her shake. I smiled back, but I noticed Peter and Rain looked a bit worried. Amy and I were confused until I felt someone standing behind us. Turning around, I saw 3 people there, a mother with her 2 children. The kids were tugging at their mom's hands, but she stopped and stared at us. It was Georgia. My ex-wife was dressed simply in a modest skirt and blouse. It wasn't worn out, but it did look used. Her naudied, short, dirty blonde hair was cut in a way that many mothers with young kids would choose to avoid tangles. Georgia's children stopped too, noticing their grandparents. Rain didn't see much of Peter and Rain, but she tried to visit fairly often. When the kids spotted her, they let go of Georgia's hands and ran over, crying out, "Grandma!" Rain wrapped them in a hug, while Georgia looked surprised. "I'm sorry, everyone," Georgia said after a moment. "Barry, Sophia, let's move on." I felt a nudge from Amy under the table. Why did it have to be me to handle this? I stood up, and our security team looked our way. I waved them off. "It's all right, Georgia," I said to my ex-wife. "Let the kids spend some time with Rain. What were you up to?" Georgia gave me a look I couldn't read. Then she turned to Amy, who smiled back at her, and Georgia sighed. She raised her arms, showing a paper-wrapped package from the nearby fish and chip shop. "I was taking the kids to the park for some fun and lunch," she said apologetically. "I'm sorry, Robbie. I didn't know you would be here." I smiled back at her. "That's fine. We didn't know you would be here either." I felt another nudge under the table. "Why don't you join us?" Georgia shook her head, and I thought I saw a tear in her eye. "Sorry, Robbie, I can't," she said, glancing at Rain. "Mom, could you take Barry and Sophia to the park when you're done here?" Rain nodded sadly. Georgia turned and left without saying more. "Go after her," Amy whispered, appearing next to me as Georgia hurried across the street. "I think it's time to forgive my sister." I looked at my wife in disbelief. She wanted me to chase after my ex-wife, her sister. Why? I hurried across to the park with one of our security team trailing a bit behind. I found Georgia sitting on a bench near the playground, her back to me, clearly upset with her head in her hands. I sat down next to her and handed her a napkin from the cafe. She took it and wiped her eyes. "Why, Robbie, why?" she asked. I wasn't sure if she meant why we were all there, why things had happened in the past, or just why things were so complicated. I leaned next to her, resting my arms on my knees as I stared out at the ocean. Because your sister is smarter than us, I replied, not addressing any of her questions directly. I heard her make a small sound, and then she blew her nose into the napkin. I'm sorry, she said softly. I know, I replied, understanding her in more ways than one. At first, she didn't catch my meaning. Her shoulders drooped again. I'm sorry, Robbie. I truly apologize for everything, she said. It's okay, Georgia, it's... I began to reply. Georgia lifted a hand to pause me. Robbie, can we talk for a minute? She asked. I smiled and nodded. Georgia took a deep breath and looked at me. Robbie, we know each other's stories. The whole world knows our story thanks to your parents. I chuckled a little but let her continue. And although I said I was sorry before, I don't think I fully understood what I meant. Maybe our marriage was in trouble from the start. But before your brother or your father, I really want to say that I was happy with you. You were a wonderful husband, and you never did anything wrong. My choices and actions were my own, and they aren't a reflection of you. I am truly sorry for how I treated you. I apologize, Robbie, for my words and for everything that happened. Can you accept that? I looked at Georgia. She was someone I had loved, and also hated. She had hurt me, and was part of a family that almost destroyed me. She had been through a lot as well, and for the last few years, she had been trying to quietly raise her 2 kids. I can accept that, Georgia. And... I paused. I'm sorry, too. Her eyes widened. You're sorry, Robbie? For what? You have nothing to be sorry for. It was all my fault. I shook my head. No, it wasn't, Georgia. You played a big part, but my father was behind it all. He got lost in his own world, and we both ended up hurt because of it. Georgia listened, and it was my turn to hold up my hand. Don't get me wrong. You still cheated on me and lied. You tried to pass your son off as mine. But... I looked out at the ocean. I could have handled things better, too. I carried a lot of anger towards you and my family for years. It didn't help me at all. I could have let go of that anger when Mom passed away. But I didn't. I took a moment, glancing across the street as people walked from the cafe to the crosswalk. Georgia noticed my security. Do they follow you everywhere? She asked, pointing to Harold, the guard who was with me. I laughed. Yeah, there are usually 2 of them whenever I'm out in public. Since the incident, they help keep overly enthusiastic fans away. You and Amy did great on the late-night shows, Georgia said, relieved for the change of topic, while eyeing Harold curiously. And thank you for not speaking badly about me. I appreciated that, she said softly. Before we knew it, our families joined us. Peter and Rain took the kids to play. Rain was thrilled to have 4 of her 5 grandkids with her at the same time. The only one missing was Ruth's son, Connor. I felt uneasy about William playing around with my half-brother, and Georgia noticed my worry. I can ask Barry to leave your son alone if it makes you uncomfortable, she suggested kindly. Amy sat on my lap, hugging me tightly. I could see that Georgia noticed this gesture. Don't pay him any mind, Georgia. He just needs to move on, she said, giving me a playful tap on the back of the head. Seriously, he should relax. That boy is not his father or his brother. I sighed. I know. I'm sorry. I realize it's not fair. Georgia shook her head. I get it, but Barry doesn't remember Brad as his father, and I've never told him the whole story. Barry? Amy and I asked at the same time. I had heard her say that name a few times already. Georgia smiled. After everything that happened, I didn't want a reminder of a son named Brad Jr., so I decided on Barry. Barry, I repeated slowly. Amy and Georgia looked at me, and I finally smiled at Georgia after years. I like that name much better, We all sat in an awkward silence for a moment until Amy broke it. "How are you doing, Georgia?" She paused for a moment, then shrugged her shoulders. "I'm okay, I guess. I'm a single mom, now with 2 kids from different fathers. Thanks to my ex-father-in-law, the only guys interested in me are not the kind I want. It's not an exciting love life." "I'm sorry," I said without thinking. Georgia laughed lightly. "Robbie, we haven't talked in years, and in one conversation you've apologized once while I've said sorry 3 times. It feels a bit strange." We all chuckled together. "Honestly, I haven't been on many dates. My family situation has been tough, so I'm just focusing on raising my kids as best as I can." She glanced at us, trying to find the right words. "At least you didn't cast an old woman to play me in the miniseries." "The actress they chose was rather nice-looking," she added with a smile. Before I could say anything wrong, Amy jumped in. "We didn't have much say in the actors after we agreed on the story, but we tried to make sure even the character who wasn't nice had a good background." I thought Georgia might get upset then, but she just smiled. "I also want to thank you for the money from the series. I never expected it, so it was a nice surprise." She smiled again. During the talks about the mini-series, Amy and Georgia made sure that everyone shown in the series, including my father and brother in prison, received some payment. They had to sign a form, but once they did, they received some money for allowing their names to be used. My dad and brother each got a check for $5,000, while most others, including my sister and Georgia, received a check for $20,000 or more. I used the money to buy school supplies for the kids. It was a good time for it. I still have a little left in a savings account. "It helped," Georgia said, with a sigh. Georgia looked at us with Amy sitting on my lap, holding on to my neck. "Amy," Georgia began. "It's okay, sis," Amy replied, sensing a serious conversation ahead. "No, I need to say this," Georgia insisted. "Amy, I have not been a good sister. I hurt you by being with your husband, and you had to deal with the fallout. You didn't know it, but I made fun of you for thinking you were settling for my leftovers." Tears began to flow down Georgia's cheeks. "And behind your back, I treated you poorly. Even when you were upset with me for what I did to Robbie, I felt worse about myself. But now I have to say I'm proud of you, Amy. We didn't understand that you were already successful then. We didn't know about Alro. I am proud of you for picking up the pieces of what I lost. Robbie was the best of us. He helped me grow, and since he left, we haven't been our best selves." Both Amy and I felt tears in our eyes, but Georgia continued. "For many years, I was foolish. I followed what everyone else wanted instead of being myself. I was broken and didn't see it. I meant what I said in that letter. I have suffered for what I did, and may never fully heal. But I need to live for my children, no matter how they came to be. They shouldn't have to pay for my mistakes. They are innocent. I am so sorry to both of you. I don't think I deserve your forgiveness, but I want to express how deeply sorry I am," Georgia finished, placing her hands in her lap. She looked smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. I noticed Amy take a breath to respond as Georgia grew quiet, but I gently squeezed her thigh to pause her. It was my turn now. "Georgia," I said softly. She met my gaze. "This is the hardest thing I've ever had to say. I've only opened my heart to 2 women in my life, and you are both here with me today. You are right. Amy saved me from a life that would have been very difficult. My family treated me badly, but you hurt me deeply because I loved you so much. If it hadn't been for Amy, I don't know how I would have made it through." Georgia nodded, understanding what I was saying. Amy held my arm tightly. She had been there with me through it all. Georgia. Amy lifted me up and helped me heal. She helped me discover who I am and loved me completely. We have faced challenges together that never made it into our shared story where she could have let me down as you did. But she never betrayed me as you did. I took a moment to gather my thoughts. With tears in her eyes, Georgia looked at Amy, who nodded with a serious expression. I knew Amy was thinking about the past events involving Kurt and others that had happened in New Zealand. But thanks to Amy, the pain you caused me has healed. Ever since your letter, my anger towards you has faded a lot. I don't love you, Georgia, but I don't hate you anymore. I paused. These words were difficult to share, and both women were watching me closely. What I'm trying to say is, Georgia, I forgive you. Once I said it, all three of us were silent. Then, Georgia suddenly broke down, crying and sobbing, releasing her emotions. Little Barry must have noticed and came running over to ask if she was okay. William followed closely behind. It's all right, sweetie, Georgia managed to say after a few minutes. Uncle Robbie just did something for me that made me very happy. What did you do, Mom? The boy asked. She looked at Barry for a moment, my brother, a child I never expected to meet, and replied simply, he forgave me. We spent the next half hour talking, trying to explain to the boys why it's important to forgive someone who hurts you. Georgia spoke up when Barry asked why I needed to forgive his mom. Many years ago, Georgia said quietly but firmly, before you were born, I wasn't very kind to your uncle. I did some awful things, and neither your uncle nor your aunt liked me very much. Because they forgave me, I can love you more now. What did you do? My son William asked Georgia. We all hesitated until Barry spoke up. He was supposed to be my dad, my young nephew said. But his family was unkind to him and pushed him away. We all turned to look at the boy. He glanced at his mother and shrugged, looking rather mature for his age. I don't remember my dad very well, he continued, thinking of Brad Janar as his father. But I remember some arguments with him. He wasn't nice to us, and he blamed you for things I shouldn't talk about because I'm a kid. He smiled a little at that last part. I chuckled softly. After that, the serious mood lightened a bit, and I suggested we all go get ice cream across the road. You might be thinking that I welcomed Georgia back into our lives since I had forgiven her and she was Amy's older sister. You're partially correct. While I forgave Georgia for what she did years ago, I wasn't ready to have her in our lives. First, my wife was quite jealous and wouldn't accept her sister, especially since Georgia still had feelings for me. Amy knew I would never have romantic feelings for Georgia again. But she didn't want to take any chances. Even after forgiving Georgia, I still didn't like her. I could be polite to her at family gatherings, but Georgia had hurt me too deeply to feel friendly toward her. In the end, Georgia never remarried. Once her kids became teenagers, she began dating again. I met the man she eventually settled with a few times. He didn't seem too bad, even though he was aware of our family's past. Georgia and he formed a relationship, though she never planned to marry him. My brother was released from prison about a year after I decided to forgive Georgia. He didn't reach out to me and I didn't contact him. He tried a couple of times to reconnect with Georgia, but was turned down. When he became pushy, she got a restraining order, which was quickly approved. Brad Jr. found work selling used cars. However, within 2 years, he was back in prison for fraud. He was buying cars for the dealership but selling them for cash without the dealer's knowledge. When he got out again, he struggled to find work and, last I heard, he was living on government benefits in a small apartment. He also faced some trouble when people learned about his past. It was unfortunate for him. As for my father, he never got out of prison. Life inside was tough for him. Many inmates were obsessed with sports, and one inmate named Robbie was quite popular. The guards often had to keep him in isolation. Even then, he frequently visited the prison infirmary. In the end, it was not another inmate who harmed him, but himself. About 5 years into his sentence, after many failed appeals, he was found in his cell. He had managed to hang himself from the light fixture. At his feet was a single piece of paper with 3 words written on it. "I am not sorry, Robert." There was no funeral. Honestly, no one cared. Although his story was mentioned in the news because of his connection to me, nobody mourned him. Our kids were in elementary school when I heard from Joanna again. She reached out and asked if I would walk her down the aisle. Joanna had met a man in Melbourne who was divorced due to issues in his past, and somehow she had convinced him to marry her. I thought about it for a few days, but after some encouragement from Amy, I agreed. It turned out Joanna's fiancé, Jordan, was just an ordinary guy working as an administrator for a State Department in Victoria. Joanna met him at work, and they had fallen in love. A couple of days before the wedding, as they shared their story, Joanna admitted it was uncertain for a while when Jordan found out who she was and that she wasn't seen in a positive light because of a miniseries about her life. Jordan even said he broke up with her briefly after she told him more about her past that wasn't included in the show. Joanna had been determined to win him over, and despite her tough past, she made him fall in love with her. It also helped my sister that they were in a bit of a hurry to get married. Joanna was 4 months pregnant. Like with Georgia, I knew I would never be very close to Joanna, but her betrayal didn't hurt as much this time. She was the only family member I had real contact with, so Amy and I kept in touch with her over the years. I was surprised they made it, but Jordan and Joanna now have 3 kids. They may appear a bit ordinary as a couple, but they're very much in love. Joanna says their routine keeps them strong, there are few surprises, and plenty of talking. She is focused on moving past her earlier life. Darren and Tony surprised everyone with 4 kids. As an older couple, no one expected this, but shortly after a tough event, Tony found out she was pregnant and later discovered it was triplets. Today, they are busy with the help of a nanny and an au pair. Darren still runs the dojo, which continues to thrive. Peter and Ruth decided to retire and bought a camper van. Now they travel around Australia as retirees, hoping to make it back to Queensland for Christmas to see their grandkids. Ruth, who we didn't hear much about, is still happily married. We catch up every few months, and she often helps arrange family gatherings between Georgia and Amy. Lastly, Amy and I are still together. Our business, Alro and Alro Homes, is doing well. We still get a bit of attention from the media now and then, but nothing serious. I've been asked to commentate on a few sports events since my fighting career ended, and while I haven't agreed yet, Amy thinks I would enjoy it. As we move into our 40s, Amy is still my partner and my support. Yes, we have a few wrinkles as we age. Yes, we have our disagreements like any couple. The kids are growing quickly, but we still hold hands whenever we can, laugh at the same jokes, and share tender moments together. Her smile still lifts my spirits, and I can be grumpy when she's upset. I know we have many years ahead of us, and I hope the next 40 years are not as hectic as the first. I want to enjoy our time together, watch our kids grow and find love, and eventually see them get married. I hope they don't face the same challenges we did. But for now, I need to go. Amy just walked into the room wearing a light robe. When I looked up at her, she opened it, revealing a playful confidence. She smiled at me, moving in a way that always catches my attention. Then she turned around and walked away slowly while laughing. The sound from my throat shows her I'm following her. Even now, This woman knows how to inspire me. So good luck to you all. See your challenges as chances, and hold on to your love as if your life depends on it, because I know that if I didn't hold on to Amy with all my strength, this story would have ended very differently. Hey everyone! Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.